Attend, O reader, our tale of fantasy. I think this is a fantasy novel? This counts as fantasy, right? Anyway, welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Today we'll be starting a brand new book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Yeah, I don't know, I was looking through books, to plan, and I realized, relatively quickly, oh man, I haven't read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I have for a long time. So I was like, yeah, let's read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Let's go. Let's do it. This one should be shorter than The Last Man, and it should be less depressing than The Last Man. I make no promises on whether either of those things are true. Yeah, that's all I really need to address, I think. Yeah, if you're a VOD watcher rather than a podcast listener, you may notice some different things on the screen. Feel free to comment those. If you're just a podcast listener, you're like, what are you talking about, man? This is audio only. Uh, anyway, I have stalled enough. I've also managed to maybe filter out uh the heater noise. Who knows? Who knows if it was even a problem in the first place? What I do know is we're gonna start in on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Chapter 1, A Shifting Reef. The year 1866 was signalized by a remarkable incident, a mysterious and puzzling phenomenon, which doubtless no one has yet forgotten, not to mention rumors which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind even in the interior of continents. Seafaring men were particularly excited. Merchants, common sailors, captains of vessels, skippers, both of Europe and America, naval officers of all countries, and the governments of several states on the two continents were deeply interested in the matter. For some time past vessels had been met by an enormous thing, a long object, spindle-shaped, occasionally phosphorescent, and infinitely larger and more rapid in its movements than a whale. The facts relating to this apparition, entered in various logbooks, agreed in most respects as to the shape of the object or creature in question, the untiring rapidity of its movements, its surprising power of locomotion, and the peculiar life which it seemed endowed. If it was a whale, it surpassed in size all those hitherto classified in science, taking into consideration the mean of observations made at divers times, rejecting the timid estate of those who assigned this object a length of 200 feet, equally with the exaggerated opinions which set it down as a mile in width and 3 in length, we might fairly conclude that the mysterious being surpassed greatly all dimensions admitted by the learned ones of the day, if it existed at all. And that it did exist was an undeniable fact, and with that tendency which disposes the human mind in favor of this marvelous, we can understand that the excitement produced in the entire world by this supernatural apparition. As to classing it in the list of fables, well, that idea was out of question. On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Burnock Steam Navigation Company had met this moving mass 5 miles off the coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank. He even prepared to determine its exact position when 2 columns of water, projected by the mysterious object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Now, unless the sandbank had been submitted to the intermittent eruption of a geyser, the Governor Higginson had to do neither more nor less than with an aquatic mammal, unknown until then, which threw up from its blowholes columns of water mixed with air and vapor. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year, in the Pacific Ocean, by the Columbus of the West India and the Pacific Steam Navigation Company. But this extraordinary creature could transport itself from one place to another with surprising velocity, as in an interval of 3 days. The Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at two different points of the chart, separated by a distance of more than 700 nautical leagues. Just out of curiosity, how far is 700 nautical leagues? I mean, 700 nautical leagues to, let's say, miles. 2,416 miles? That's a long way for 1866. 15 days later, 2,000 miles further off, the Helvetia. Oh, sorry, I'm stopping mid-sentence. Santa Claus gift is a bot. Thank you very much, Gariki. Get dunked on, Scrub Lord. You don't belong here. Banned. Illegal. Begone, bot. Blocking them, too. So is Whomst? So is Delotix. Thank you. Lovely. Love that. Plague of bots in my life. Begone, bot. There we go. That oughta fix things. Where was I? 15 days later, 2,000... Yeah. 15 days later, 2,000 miles farther off, the Helvetia of the Compagnie Nationale and the Shannon of the Royal Mail Steamship Company, sailing to windward in that portion of the Atlantic, lying between the United States and Europe, respectively signaled the monster to each other in 42 degrees 15 minutes north latitude and 60 degrees 35 minutes west longitude. In these simultaneous observations, they thought themselves justified in estimating the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet, as the Shannon and Helvetia were of smaller dimensions than it, though they measured 300 feet overall. No worries. Thank you for letting me know. I need to look a little closer at that bot list you posted in the group server. Do I have a command for the group? There's a list of people down below me. It's called the United Storytellers group. I need to talk my bot into being able to tell people that Discord exists as well. But for now, know it exists. I'll post a link in the description, in the show notes for the podcast, for sure. Where was I? Now the largest whales, those which frequent the parts of the sea around the Aleutian, Kalumac, and Umgalich Islands, have never exceeded the length of 60 yards, if they even attain that. In every place of great resort the monster was the fashion. They sang of it in the cafes, ridiculed it in the papers, and represented it on the stage. All kinds of stories were circulated regarding it. There appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic and imaginary creature, from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of subarctic regions, to the immense kraken, whose tentacles could entangle a ship of 500 tons and hurry it into the abyss of the ocean. The legends of ancient times were even revived. Then burst forth the unending argument between the believers and the unbelievers in the societies of the wise and the scientific journals. The question of the monster inflamed all minds. Editors of scientific journals, quarreling with believers in the supernatural, spilled seas of ink during this memorable campaign, some even drawing blood for the sea serpent they came to direct personalities. During the first months of the year 1867, the question seemed buried, never to revive, when new facts were brought before the public. It was then no longer a scientific problem to be solved, but a real danger seriously to be avoided. The question took quite another shape. The monster became a small island, a rock, a reef, but a reef of indefinite and shifting proportions. On the 5th of March, 1867, the Moravian of the Montreal Ocean Company, finding herself during the night in 27 degrees 30 minutes latitude and 72 degrees 15 minutes longitude, struck on her starboard quarter a rock, marked in no chart for that part of the sea. Under the combined efforts of the wind and its 400 horsepower, it was going at the rate of 13 knots. Had it not been for the superior strength of the hull of the Moravian, She would have been broken by the shock and gone down with the 237 passengers she was bringing home from Canada. The accident happened about 5 o'clock in the morning, as the day was breaking. The officers of the quarterdeck hurried to the after part of the vessel. They examined the sea with most careful attention and saw nothing but a strong eddy about 3 cables' length distant, as if the surface had been violently agitated. The bearings of the place were taken exactly, and the Moravian continued its route without apparent damage. Had it struck on a submerged rock or on an enormous wreck? They couldn't tell, but on examination of the ship's bottom when undergoing repairs, it was found that part of her keel was broken. This fact, so grave in itself, might perhaps have been forgotten like many others if 3 weeks after it had not been reenacted under similar circumstances. But thanks to the nationality of the victim of the shock, thanks to the reputation of the company to which the vessel belonged, the circumstance became extensively circulated. The 13th of April, 1867, the sea being beautiful, the breeze favorable, the Scotia of the Cunard Company's line found herself in 15 degrees 12 minutes longitude and 45 degrees 37 minutes latitude. She was going at the speed of 13.5 knots. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, while the passengers were assembled at lunch in the great saloon, a slight shock was felt on the hull of the Scotia, on her quarter a little aft of the port paddle. The Scotia had not struck, but she had been struck, and seemingly by something rather sharp and penetrating, rather than blunt. The shock had been so slight that no one had been alarmed, had it not been for the shouts of the carpenter's watch, who rushed onto the bridge exclaiming, "We're sinking! We're sinking!" At first the passengers were much frightened, but Captain Anderson hastened to reassure them. The danger could not be imminent. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments by strong partitions, could brave with impunity any leak. Captain Anderson went down immediately into the hold and found that the sea was pouring into the 5th compartment, and the rapidity of the influx proved that the force of the water was considerable. Fortunately, this compartment didn't hold the boilers, or the fires would have been immediately extinguished. Captain Anderson ordered the engines to be stopped at once, and one of the men went down to ascertain the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterward, they discovered the existence of a large hole, 2 yards in diameter, in the ship's bottom. Such a leak could not be stopped, and the Scotia, her paddles half submerged, was obliged to continue her course. She was then 300 miles from Cape Clear, and after 3 days' delay, which caused great uneasiness in Liverpool, she entered the basin of the company. The engineers visited the Scotia, which was put in the dry dock. They could scarcely believe it possible. At 2.5 yards below water mark was a regular rent in the form of an isosceles triangle. The broken place in the iron plates was so perfectly defined it could not have been more neatly done by a punch. It was clear, then, that the instrument producing the perforation was not of a common stamp, and after having been driven with prodigious strength and piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick, had withdrawn itself by a backward motion. Such was the last fact which resulted in exciting once more the torrent of public opinion. From this moment on, all unlucky casualties, which could not be otherwise accounted for, were put down to the monster. Upon this imaginary creature rested the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, which unfortunately were considerable. For of 3,000 ships whose loss was annually recorded at Lloyd's, the number of sailing and steamships supposed to be totally lost, from the absence of all news, amounted to not less than 200. Now it was the monster who, justly or unjustly, was accused of their disappearance, and thanks to it, communication between the different continents became more and more dangerous. The public demanded sharply that the seas should be at any price relieved from this formidable cetacean. There's a little annotation here that says, "Member of the whale family." Yes, that is what a cetacean is. Thank you. In case I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Are my captions working? Have my captions given up on functioning? Someone let me know. I know if I rattle on too long, they just they don't display on the The little preview window. Haven't seen a caption. Illegal. No. Bad. That's not how that works. There should be captions happening right now. Yeah, that's the right thing. I do not like that. I do not like that at all. Show preview. Settings? Huh. That's very odd. I love when my captions do this to me. It's my favorite thing. Here, let me try this. Of course, I've been reading for an entire chapter and there's no captions. Love that. Yeah. I gave up on captions after 3 months of hit and miss. I've had really good luck with captions. Look, there they go. Yeah, I'm using the Rat with a Compiler caption thing plugin for OBS, and it works most of the time. What do you mean you can't see them? That's silly. Let me open my stream on a phone and see once if I can see. Okay, I can see them. Go into settings. Believe it's in advanced settings? Question mark. How did I turn these on? I don't remember how I turned these on mobile. I know on PC you can just kind of click the little gear icon and the CC button is hiding in there. But I'm not sure where it went on mobile. Ah, it's just a little switch in the little gear icon on mobile. It just says closed captions, and you can turn them off and on. And they're on my screen. They seem to be working. I don't know why they're not working on your screen. That does bother me a little bit, but oh well. They're working for me, which means I have the caption file, so the video will have captions. Not even in your gear for settings. That's oddball. Raz. If Raz is here. Question of the day. Is Raz here? No, says the users in chat filter. Okay. When Raz gets here, someone ask her to check if the captions are a real thing. Because they are on my screen, but they're not on Goriki's, which is strange. My apologies. I'm doing my best to produce captions. We'll see if they stick. Anyway, now that I've gotten thoroughly distracted by the concept of captions, let me poke some buttons over here and then get back into the book. I've just been reading the book on screen. Yeah, that is the upside of having the book on screen, is 99% of what I'm saying is captioned anyway. The captions are mostly there for, if you can't read what's on the screen, or if I'm rattling on like I am right now. But the book's on screen for the important part, right? Anyway. Chapter 2. Pro and Con. At the period when these events took place, I had just returned from a scientific research in the disagreeable territory of Nebraska in the United States. In the virtue of my office as an assistant professor... Oh, excuse me. Sorry. In virtue of my office as an assistant professor in the Museum of Natural History in Paris, the French government had attached me to that expedition. After 6 months in Nebraska, I arrived in New York toward the end of March, laden with a precious collection. My departure for France was fixed for the first days in May. Meanwhile, I was occupying myself in classifying my mineralogical, botanical, and zoological riches when the accident happened to the Scotia. I was perfectly up in the subject, which was the question of the day. How could I be otherwise? I had read and reread all the American and European papers without being any nearer a conclusion. This mystery puzzled me. Under the impossibility of forming an opinion, I jumped from one extreme to the other. That there really was something could not be doubted, and the incredulous were invited to put their finger on the wound of the Scotia. Raz, if you can you check if the captions exist? They exist on my screen, but Gariki's having trouble. So if they show up on your screen, then it's a weird wrinkle with something involving Gariki's stack here. Also, am I pronouncing your name correctly? I should have asked initially. But if they're on your screen, something's weird on Gariki's end. But if they're not on your screen, but they're on my screen, I don't know why they're performing the way they are. I'm seeing CC when I turn them on. Okay, good. You can turn CC on. Okay, Gariki, maybe give the page a refresh? I don't know. It seems like the captions firmly refused to function for a hot minute at the beginning of the stream. They're usually only that stubborn. There they go! Captions! Success! Anyway, now that the captions are actually working, please try to include CC on streams. I know, like, automated captions aren't 100% correct, but it makes the stream so much more watchable. At least in my case. Because my brain is upside down, and I can't understand people when they're talking sometimes. So even automated captions help. Obviously, paying somebody money for actually good captions is the real end game here, but that takes money. Money I don't have to spend on the stream right this second. Well, I don't, anyway, I digress a great deal. Where were we? Wound of the Scotia, that's where we were. On my arrival at New York, the question was of its height. The theory of the supporting island and the unapproachable sandbanks, supported by minds little competent to form a judgment, was abandoned. And indeed, unless this shoal had a machine in its stomach, how could it change its position with such astonishing rapidity? From the same cause, the idea of a floating hull of an enormous wreck was given up. There remained then only two possible solutions of the question. I'll allow that. Two possible solutions to the question, which created two distinct parties. On one side, those who were of a monster of colossal strength, on the other, those who were for a submarine vessel of enormous motive power. There is colors now. You can actually, really dial in exactly what you want out of the captions. I usually leave them as the little, traditional TV closed caption box because they're really easy to read, but you can edit them to be white text with a black outline or black text with a white outline, or you can do whatever you want with them. If you're generating CC files yourself, rather than having it be produced automatically, you can even identify speakers with different color. I've been meaning to check the code of this. Your mission, viewer, should you choose to accept. Correct. Oh, something came unplugged. Brain fallout disorder. What was I saying? Oh, speaker identification. If I have the ability to change the code of this plugin, I think the Google Speech API does speaker identification now, which isn't particularly useful in my case, because it's just me, but, that could be really handy for people doing, Discord calls or VTuber collaboration type stuff. I might try and dig into the code on that. But the Google Speech API, it's very good at understanding what I'm saying, because it was trained on my type of speech. Anyway, I've rattled about. I was not happy the 3 months I did it, and several viewers told me to drop it. That's fair. I have gotten thoroughly distracted by the concept of captions, but it's not that hard to distract me. Two possible solutions to the question. That's where we were. But this last theory, plausible as it was, could not stand against inquiries made in both worlds. That a private gentleman should have such a machine at his command was not likely. Where, when, and how was it built, and how could its construction have been kept secret? Certainly a government might possess such a destructive machine, and in these disastrous times when the ingenuity of man has multiplied the power of weapons of war, it was possible that without the knowledge of others, a state might try to work such a formidable engine. But the idea of a war machine fell before the declaration of governments. As public interest was in question and transatlantic communications suffered, their veracity could not be doubted. But how admit that the construction of this submarine boat had escaped the public eye? For a private gentleman to keep the secret under such circumstances would be very difficult, and for a state whose every act is persistently watched by powerful rivals, certainly impossible. Upon my arrival in New York, several persons did me the honor of consulting me on the phenomenon in question. I published in French a work in quarto, in 2 volumes, entitled Mysteries of the Great Submarine Grounds. This book, highly approved of in the learned world, gained for me a special reputation in this rather obscure branch of natural history. My advice was asked. As long as I could deny the reality of the fact, I confined myself to a decided negative. But soon, having found myself driven into a corner, I was obliged to explain myself, point by point. I discuss the question in all its forms, politically and scientifically, and I give here an extract from the carefully studied article which I published in the number of the 30th of April. It ran as follows. After examining one by one the different theories, rejecting all other suggestions, it becomes necessary to admit the existence of a marine animal of enormous power. The great depths of the ocean are entirely unknown to us. Soundings cannot reach them. What passes in those remote depths, what beings live or can live 12 or 15 miles beneath the surface of the waters? What's the organization of these animals? We can scarcely conjecture. However, the solution of the problem submitted to me may modify the form of the dilemma. Either we do know all the varieties of beings which people on our planet, or we do not. If we do not know them all, if nature still has secrets in the deeps for us, nothing is more comfortable to reason than to admit the existence of fishes or cetaceans of other kinds, or even of new species of an organization formed to inhabit the strata inaccessible to soundings, and which an accident of some sort has brought at long intervals to the upper level of the ocean. If, on the contrary, we do know all living kinds, we must necessarily seek for the animal in question amongst those marine beings we've already classed, and in that case I should be disposed to admit the existence of some gigantic narwhal. The common narwhal, better known as the unicorn of the sea, often attains a length of 60 feet. Increase its size 5-fold, 10-fold, give it strength proportionate to its size, lengthen its destructive weapons, and you'll obtain the animal required. It'll have the proportions determined by the officers of the Shannon, the instrument required by the perforation of the Scotia, and the power necessary to pierce the hull of the steamer. Indeed, the narwhal is armed with a sort of ivory sword, a halberd, according to the expression of certain naturalists. The principal tusk has the hardness of steel, and some of these tusks have been found buried in the bodies of whales, which the unicorn always attacks with success. Others have been drawn out, not without trouble, from the bottoms of ships, which they pierce through and through as a gimlet pierces a barrel. The Museum of the Faculty of Medicine of Paris possesses one of these defensive weapons, 2 yards and a quarter in length and 15 inches in diameter at the base. 20,000 leagues, by the way, is about the altitude at which the Concorde flies at Mach 2. That's a fascinating coincidence. Neat. Very well. Suppose this weapon to be 6 times stronger and the animal 10 times more powerful. Launch it at a rate of about 20 miles an hour, and you obtain a shock capable of producing the catastrophe required. Until further information, therefore, I shall maintain it to be a sea unicorn of colossal dimensions, armed not with a halberd but with a real spur, as the armored frigates or the rams of war, whose massiveness and motive power it would possess at the same time. Thus may there be something over and above all one has ever conjectured, seen, perceived, or experienced, which is just within the bounds of possibility. Those last words were cowardly on my part, but Up to a certain point, I wished to shelter my dignity as a professor, and not give too much cause for laughter to the Americans, who laugh well when they do laugh. I reserved for myself a way of escape. In effect, however, I admitted the existence of the monster. My article was warmly discussed, which procured it a high reputation. It rallied round it a certain number of partisans. The solution it proposed gave, at least, full liberty to the imagination. The human mind delights in grand conceptions of supernatural beings, and the sea is precisely their best vehicle, the only medium through which these giants, against which terrestrial animals, such as elephants or rhinoceroses, are as nothing, can be produced or developed. Apologies, there's another bot. I specifically have someone in chat. I have a moderator in chat that runs a command every so often to ban these nasty bot lads. But hang on. Let me just... No, that's not... Let me just give you, how do I do this? What is the thing I want? Let me see here. No, that's not what I want either. Where is the item I want here? Local man, there are several workarounds, that's why I educate. Fair. If I can find the button I want to press, please. I cannot find the button I want to press, so I'm just going to do it this way. I believe that should have done what I think it does. Potentially. Yeah, there you go. Now you can get the bots yourself. You have a nice shiny sword. Bonk. Okay. There we go. The industrial and commercial papers treated the question chiefly from this point of view. The Shipping and Mercantile Gazette, the Lloyd's List, the Packet Boat, and the Maritime and Colonial Review, all papers devoted to insurance companies which threatened to raise their rates of premium, were unanimous on this point. Public opinion had been pronounced. The United States were the first in the field, and in New York they made preparations for an expedition destined to pursue this narwhal. A frigate of great speed, the Abraham Lincoln, was put in commission as soon as possible. The arsenals were opened to Commander Farragut, who hastened the arming of his frigate, but as it always happens, the moment it was decided to pursue the monster didn't appear. For 2 months no one heard it spoken of. No ship met with it. It seemed as if this unicorn knew of the plots weaving around it. It had been so much talked of, even through the Atlantic cable, that Gestures pretended this slender fly had stopped the telegram on its passage and was making the most of it. So, when the frigate had been armed for a long campaign and provided with formidable fishing apparatus, no one could tell what course to pursue. Impatience grew apace when, on the 2nd of July, they learned that a steamer of the line of San Francisco... is it okay to add blocked terms and pre-ban some other nouns? Absolutely. I assume the block terms are just like things that those bots like to post. And absolutely pre-ban some other knowns. I don't want any of those nasty bot lads in my life. Unless I invite them. Yeah, go for it. I think links are blanket blacklisted, other than Twitch and maybe YouTube. But yeah, feel free to block them. Go for it. Frigate had been armed for a long campaign. That's where I was. Frigate had been armed for a long campaign and provided with formidable fishing apparatus. No one could tell which course to pursue. Impatience grew apace, and when, on the 2nd of July, they learned that a steamer of the line of San Francisco, from California to Shanghai, had seen the animal 3 weeks before in the North Pacific Ocean. The excitement caused by this news was extreme. The ship was revictualled and well stocked with coal. 3 hours before the Abraham Lincoln left Brooklyn Pier, I received a letter worded as follows: To Monsieur Aronnax, Professor in the Museum of Paris, Fifth Avenue Hotel, New York. Sir, if you will consent to join the Abraham Lincoln in this expedition, the government of the United States will with pleasure see France represented in this enterprise. Commander Farragut has a cabin at your disposal. Very cordially yours, J.B. Hobson, Secretary of Marine. Okay, that's chapter 2, now that we with a few digressions, but, that's tradition around here. Let's dive into chapter 3. I form my resolution. 3 seconds before the arrival of J.B. Hobson's letter, I no more thought of pursuing the Unicorn than of attempting the passage of the North Sea. 3 seconds after reading the letter of the Honorable Secretary of Marine, I felt that my true vocation, the sole end of my life, was to chase this disturbing monster and purge it from the world. But I had just returned from a fatiguing journey, weary and longing for repose. I aspired to nothing more again than seeing my country, my friends, my little lodging by the Jardin des Plantes, and my dear and precious collections, but nothing could keep me back. I forgot all, fatigue, friends, collections, and accepted, without hesitation, the offer of the American government. Besides, thought I, all roads lead back to Europe, and the Unicorn may be amicable enough to hurry me toward the coast of France. This worthy animal may allow itself to be caught in the seas of Europe for my particular benefit, and I will not bring back less than half a yard of its ivory halberd to the Museum of Natural History. But in the meanwhile I must seek this narwhal in the North Pacific Ocean, which, to return to France, was taking the road to the Antipodes. Conseil, I called in an impatient voice. Conseil was my servant, a true, devoted Flemish boy who had accompanied me in all my travels. I liked him, and he returned the liking well. He was quiet by nature, regular from principle, zealous from habit, and inviting little disturbance at the different surprises of life, very quick with his hands, and apt at any service required of him, and despite his name, never giving advice, even when asked for it. Conseil had followed me for the last 10 years wherever science had led. Never once did he complain of the length or fatigue of a journey, never make an objection to pack his portmanteau for whatever country it might be, or however far away, whether China or Congo. Besides all this, he had good health, which defied all sickness, and solid muscles, but no nerves. Good morals are understood. This boy was 30 years old, and his age to that of his master is 15 to 20. May I be excused for saying that I was 40 years old? But Conseil had one fault. He was ceremonious to a degree, and would never speak to me, but in the third person, which was sometimes provoking. Conseil, said I again, beginning with feverish hands to make preparations for my departure. Certainly I was sure of this devoted boy. As a rule, I never asked him if it were convenient for him or not to follow me in my travels, but this time the expedition in question might be prolonged, and the enterprise might be hazardous in pursuit of an animal capable of sinking a frigate as easily as a nutshell. Here there was matter for reflection, even in the most impassive man in the world. What would Conseil say? Conseil, I called the third time. Conseil finally appeared. Did you call, sir? He said, entering. Yes, my boy. Make preparations for me and yourself, too. We leave in 2 hours. As you please, sir, replied Conseil quietly. Not an instant to lose. Lock in my trunk all traveling utensils, coats, shirts, stockings, without counting, as many as you can, and make haste. And your collections, sir? They'll keep them at the hotel. We are not returning to Paris, then? Oh, certainly, I answered evasively, by making a curve. Will the curve please you, sir? Oh, it'll be nothing. Not quite so direct a road, that is all. We take our passage in the Abraham Lincoln. As you think proper, sir. You see, my friend, it has to do with the monster, the famous narwhal. We are going to purge it from the seas. A glorious mission, but a dangerous one. We cannot tell where we may go. These animals can be very capricious. But we go whether or no. We've got a captain who is pretty wide awake. Our luggage was transported to the deck of the frigate immediately. I hastened on board and asked for Commander Farragut. One of the sailors conducted me to the poop deck, where I found myself in the presence of a good-looking officer who held out his hand to me. "Monsieur Pierrot Roman Aronnax," said he. "Himself, Commander Farragut." "You're welcome, Professor. Your cabin's ready for you." I bowed and desired to be conducted to the cabin destined for me. The Abraham Lincoln had been well chosen and equipped for her new destination. She was a frigate of great speed, fitted with high-pressure engines which emitted a pressure of 7 atmospheres. Under this, the Abraham Lincoln attained the mean speed of nearly 18 knots and a third an hour. A considerable speed, but nevertheless insufficient to grapple with the giant cetacean. The interior arrangements of the frigate corresponded to its nautical qualities. I was well satisfied with my cabin, which was in the after part, opening upon the gun-room. "We shall be well off here," said I to Conseil. "As well, by your honour's leave, as a hermit crab in the shell of a whelk," said Conseil. I left Conseil to stow our trunks conveniently away, and remounted the poop deck in order to survey the preparations for departure. At that moment, Commander Farragut was Commander Farragut was ordering the last moorings to be cast loose, which held the Abraham Lincoln to the pier of Brooklyn. So, in a quarter of an hour, perhaps less, the frigate would have sailed without me. I should have missed this extraordinary, supernatural, and incredible expedition, the recital of which may well meet with some suspicion. But Commander Farragut would not love to lose a day, nor an hour, in scouring the sea in which the animal had been sighted. He sent for the engineer. "Is the steam full on?" "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. "Go ahead," cried Commander Farragut. Chapter 4. Ned Land. Captain Farragut was a good seaman, worthy of the frigate he commanded. His vessel and he were one. He was the soul of it. On the question of the monster there was no doubt in his mind, and he would not allow the existence of the animal to be disputed on board. He believed in it as certain good women believe in the Leviathan, by faith, not by reason. The monster did exist, and he'd sworn to rid the seas of it. Either Captain Farragut would kill the narwhal, or the narwhal would kill the captain. There was no third course. The officers on board shared the opinion. They shared the opinion of their chief. They were ever chatting, discussing, and calculating the various chances of a meeting, watching narrowly the vast surface of the ocean. More than one took up his quarters voluntarily in the cross trees, who would have cursed such a berth in any other circumstance. As long as the sun described its daily course, the rigging was crowded with sailors, whose feet were burnt to such an extent by the heat of the deck as to render it unbearable. Still, the Abraham Lincoln had not yet breasted the suspected waters of the Pacific. As to the ship's company, they desired nothing better than to meet the Unicorn, to harpoon it, hoist it on board, and dispatch it. They watched the sea with eager attention. Besides, Captain Farragut had spoken of a certain sum of $2,000, set apart for whoever should first sight the monster, were he cabin boy, common seaman, or an officer. I leave you to judge how eyes were used on board the Abraham Lincoln. For my own part, I was not behind the others, and left to no one my share of daily observations. The frigate might have been called the Argus for 100 reasons. Only one among us, Conseil, seemed to protest his indifference against the question which so interested us all, and seemed to be out of keeping with the general enthusiasm on board. Sorry, I've been watching the band names scroll up on the right side of my screen, and I was like, "Ooh." Well, I thought one of them was Markiplier for a second. No, that's Makerplier. No shortage of these bot lads, huh? Anyway, I've said that Captain Farragut had carefully provided his ship with every apparatus for catching the gigantic cetacean. No whaler had ever been better armed. We possessed every known engine, from the harpoon thrown by the hand to the barbed arrows of the blunderbuss and the explosive balls of the duck gun. On the forecastle? I'm gonna say forecastle. I know that's incorrect, but it's fine. I'm not a sailor. On the forecastle lay the perfection of a breech-loading gun, very thick at the breech and very narrow in the bore. The model of which had been in the exhibition of 1867. This precious weapon of American origin could throw with ease a conical projectile of 9 pounds to a mean distance of 10 miles. Thus the Abraham Lincoln wanted for no means of destruction, and what was better still, she had on board Ned Land, the prince of harpooners. Ned Land was a Canadian, with an uncommon quickness of hand, and who knew no equal in his dangerous occupation. Skill, coolness, audacity, and cunning he possessed in a superior degree, and it must be a cunning whale to escape the stroke of his harpoon. Ned Land was about 40 years of age. He was a tall man, more than 6 feet high, strongly built, grave and taciturn, occasionally violent and very passionate when contradicted. His person attracted attention, but above all the boldness of his look, which gave a singular expression to his face. Who calls himself Canadian calls himself French, and little communicative as Ned Land was, I must admit that he took a certain liking for me. My nationality drew him to me, no doubt. It was an opportunity for him to talk, and for me to hear the old language of Rabelais, which is still in use in some Canadian provinces. The harpooner's family was originally from Quebec, and already a tribe of hardy fishermen when this town was belonging to France. Little by little Ned Land acquired a taste for chatting, and I loved to hear the recital of his adventures in the polar seas. He related his fishing and his combats with a natural poetry of expression. His recital took on the form of an epic poem, and I seemed to be listening to a Canadian Homer, singing the Iliad of the regions of the north. I am portraying this hardy companion as I really knew him. We're old friends now, united in that unchangeable friendship which is born and cemented amidst extreme dangers. Ah, brave Ned, I ask no more than to live 100 years longer, that I may have more time to dwell the longer on your memory. Now, what was Ned Land's opinion upon the question of the marine monster? I must admit he did not believe in the unicorn, and was the only one on board who did not share that universal conviction. He even avoided the subject when I one day thought it my duty to press upon it. One magnificent evening, the 30th of July, that is to say 3 weeks after our departure, the frigate was abreast of Cape Blanc, 30 miles to the leeward of the coast of Patagonia. We'd crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, and the Straits of Magellan opened less than 700 miles to the south. Before 8 days were over, the Abraham Lincoln would be plowing the waters of the Pacific. Seated on the poop deck, Ned Land and I were chatting of one thing and another as we looked up at this mysterious sea, whose great depths had up to this time been inaccessible to the eye of man. I naturally led up the conversation to the giant unicorn, and examined the various chances of success or failure of the expedition. But, seeing that Ned Land let me speak without saying too much himself, I pressed him a bit more closely. Well, Ned, is it possible that you are not convinced of the existence of the cetacean that we're following? Have you any particular reason for being so incredulous? The harpooner looked at me fixedly for some moments before answering, struck his broad forehead with his hand, a habit of his, as if to collect himself, and said at last, "Perhaps I have, Mr. Aronnax. But Ned, You, a whaler by profession, familiarized with all the great marine mammalia, you ought to be the last to doubt under such circumstances. That is just what deceives you, Professor. As a whaler, I have followed many a cetacean, harpooned a great number, and killed several. But however strong or well armed they may have been, neither their tails nor their weapons would have been able to even scratch the iron plates of a steamer. You'll have to excuse my terrible French accent. I have no idea what a Quebecois accent sounds like, so I'm just doing my horrible French accent. But it's not the first time you've had to endure my lack of accent practice if you were here for Phantom. Anyway. But, Ned, they tell of ships which the teeth of the narwhal have pierced through and through. Wooden ships, that is possible, but I have never seen it done, and until further proof I deny that whales, cetaceans, or sea unicorns could ever produce the effect you describe. Well, Ned, I repeat it with a conviction resting on the logic of facts. I believe in the existence of a mammal power fully organized, belonging to the branch of vertebrate, like the whales, the cachalots, or the dolphins, and furnished with a horn of defense of great penetrating power. Said the harpooner, shaking his head with the air of a man who wouldn't be convinced. Notice one thing, my worthy Canadian. If such an animal is in existence, if it inhabits the depths of the ocean, if it frequents the strata lying miles below the surface of the water, it must necessarily possess an organization the strength of which would defy all comparison. And why this powerful organization? Because it requires incalculable strength to keep oneself in those strata and resist their pressure. Listen to me. Let us admit that the pressure of the atmosphere is represented by the weight of a column of water, let's say 32 feet high. In reality, the column of water would be shorter, as we're speaking of seawater, the density of which is greater than that of fresh water. But very well. When you dive, Ned, as many times 32 feet of water as there are above you, so many times does your body bear a pressure equal to that of the atmosphere, that is to say, 15 pounds for every square inch of its surface. It follows, then, at 320 feet, this pressure equals that of 10 atmospheres, 100 atmospheres at 3,200 feet, and of 1,000 atmospheres at 32,000 feet. That's about 6 miles, which is equivalent to saying that if you could attain this depth in the ocean, each square 3/8 of an inch of the surface of your body would bear a pressure of 5,600 pounds. My brave Ned, do you know how many square inches you carry on the surface of your body? I have no idea, Mr. Arnax. About 6,500. And as in reality, the atmospheric pressure is about 15 pounds to the square inch. Your 6,500 square inches bear at this moment a pressure of 97,500 pounds. Without your perceiving it. And if you are not crushed by such a pressure, it is because the air penetrates the interior of your body with equal pressure. Hence, perfect equilibrium between the interior and exterior pressure, which thus neutralize each other and which allows you to bear it without inconvenience. But in the water is another thing. Yes, I understand, replied Ned, becoming more attentive. Because the water surrounds me, but it does not penetrate. Precisely, Ned. So that at 32 feet beneath the surface of the sea, you'd undergo a pressure of 97,500 pounds. At 320 feet, 10 times that pressure. At 3,200 feet, 100 times that pressure. Lastly, at 32,000 feet, at 1,000 times that pressure, would be 97,500,000 pounds. That is to say that you would be flattened as if you'd been drawn from the plates of a hydraulic machine. The devil? Very well, my worthy harpooner. If some vertebrate, some several hundred yards long, let's say, large in proportion, can maintain itself in such depths, of those whose surface is represented by millions of square inches, that is, by tens of millions of pounds, We must estimate the pressure they undergo. Consider, then, what must be the resistance of their bony structure and the strength of their organization to withstand said pressure. Why, they must be made of iron plates 8 inches thick, like the armored frigates. As you say, Ned. And think what destruction such a mass could cause if hurled with the speed of an express train against the hull of a vessel. Yes, certainly. Perhaps, replied the Canadian, shaken by these figures, but not yet willing to give in. Well, have I convinced you? You have convinced me of one thing, sir, which is that if such animals do exist at the bottom of the seas, they must necessarily be as strong as you say. But if they do not exist, mine obstinate harpooner, how do you explain the accident to the Scotia? Excuse me. Okay. I'm genuinely curious whether whether that math is anywhere near correct. I mean, it makes sense for me estimation, but are those the correct amounts of pounds per square inch? Just worth something worth considering. Either way, it's a very fun thought experiment. Let's dive into chapter 5, At Adventure rather. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by old school writing. If it sounds real, just believe it. There is so much. Oh yeah, that's probably a thing, right? Especially in these old fantasy sci-fi novels. There's so much of oh yeah, well this figure follows that figure, so definitely the moon is made of cheese, and I'm like, Anyway, no special incident, that's where we were. But one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land and proved what confidence we might place in him. The 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers, from whom we learned that they knew nothing about the narwhal. But one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had stepped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe. And fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale, he harpooned 2 with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favor. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July, we were at the opening of the Straits of Magellan, level with Cape Vierges. Vierges? Yeah, that is an I. But Commander Farragut would not take a tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. Massive anti-bot shield. That's a great way of putting it. For context, for the past few chapters I've been reading there, Gariki here has been, let's say, improving the defenses of our fair igloo, building a little wall to keep out all these bots. Anyway, we were heading around Cape Horn, I believe. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the narwhal in the narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island, this lost rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the name of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken toward the northwest, and the next day the screw of the frigate was at last beating the waters of the Pacific. Subtitle had a massive pause on Cape Horn, was about to say something else. Ooh, I'm glad it worked out the place name. Very good job, captions. Keep your eyes open, called out the sailors, and they were opened widely. both eyes and glasses, a little dazzled, it's true, by the prospect of $2,000, but had not an instant's repose. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board, giving but few minutes to my meals, but a few hours to sleep. Indifferent to either rain or sunshine, I did not leave the poop deck of the vessel. Now, leaning on the netting of the forecastle, forecastle? Is it forecastle? I cannot remember. I'm gonna say this every time we see this word, regardless. Netting the forecastle, now on the taffrail? Taffrail. Nautical terms. I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could reach, and how often have I shared the emotion of the majority of the crew when some capricious whale raised its black back above the waves. The poop deck of the vessel was crowded on a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with heaving breast and troubled eye watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, while Conseil kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement. The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signaled, a simple whale or a common cachalot, which soon disappeared amidst a storm of abuse. Taffrail is a usually pretty railing at the rear of the ship. Railing at the rear of the ship. Neat. We've learned a word. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favorable auspices. There we go. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe, but the sea was beautiful and easily scanned round a vast circumference. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degrees of latitude, and the 27th of the same month we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This passed, the frigate took a more decided westerly direction, and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, and with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and keep clear of continents or islands, which the beast itself seemed to shun, perhaps because there was not enough water for him, suggested greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquesas and the Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and made for the China Sea. We were on the theater of the last diversions of the monster, and to say truth, we no longer lived on board. The entire ship's crew were undergoing a nervous excitement, of which I can give no idea. They couldn't eat, they couldn't sleep. 20 times a day, a misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor seated on the taffrail would cause dreadful perspirations, and these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the waters of the northern Pacific, running at whales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam, and backing ever and anon at the risk of damaging her machinery. And not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain himself, and certainly, had it not been for the resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut, the frigate would have headed due southward. The useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with. She had done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. FYI, there used to be a lot of different Sandwich Islands. The guy working for him was naming everything that, in case he was beaten in the registration office by another explorer. Really, I thought there was just like one set of Sandwich Islands in that kind of northerly Pacific area. I guess whoever was Whoever was discovering things for the Earl of Sandwich really liked the Earl of Sandwich. That's where we were. This was represented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and the service suffered. I won't say there's a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of obstinacy, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in 3 days the monster didn't appear, the man at the helm should give 3 turns of the wheel, and the Abraham Lincoln would make for the European seas. This promise was made on the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The ocean was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for a last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses were used with feverish activity. It was a grand defiance given to the giant narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed, the steam was at half pressure, 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and stimulate the apathy of the animal in case it shouldn't be met in those parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in all directions round the Abraham Lincoln as she lay to, and did not leave a spot of the sea unexplored. But the night of the 4th of November arrived without the unveiling of the submarine mystery. The next day, the 5th of November, at 12, the delay would, morally speaking, expire. After that time, Commander Farragut, faithful to his promise, was to turn the course to the southeast and abandon forever the northern region to the Pacific. The frigate was then in 31 degrees 15 minutes north latitude and 136 degrees 42 minutes east longitude. The coast of Japan still remained less than 200 miles to leeward. Night was approaching. They had just struck 8 bells. Large clouds veiled the face of the moon, then in its first quarter. The sea undulated peaceably under the stern of the vessel. At that moment I was leaning forward on the starboard netting. Conseil, standing near me, was looking straight before him. The crew, perched in the ratlines, examined the horizon, which contracted and darkened by degrees. Officers with their night glasses scoured the growing darkness. Sometimes the ocean sparkled under the rays of the moon, which darted between 2 clouds. Then all trace of light was lost in the darkness. In looking at Conseil, I could see he was undergoing a little of the general influence. At least I thought so. Perhaps for the first time his nerves vibrated to a sentiment of curiosity. Come, Conseil, this is the last chance of pocketing the $2,000. May I be permitted to say, sir, that I never reckoned on getting the prize, and had the government of the Union offered $100,000, it would have been none the poorer. Ah, you're right, Conseil. It's a foolish affair after all, and one upon which we entered too lightly. What time lost, what useless emotions! We should have been back in France 6 months ago. In your little room, sir, and in your museum, sir, and I should have already classed all your fossils, sir. And the Barbossa would have been installed in its cage in the Jardin des Plantes, and have drawn all the curious people of the capital. Ooh. I see you're using Stream Elements. You'd be better served setting it to VIP so Moobot doesn't trip it up on occasion. Mine used to get in trouble. That's a good point. I didn't know that Moobot and Stream Elements would step on each other's toes. I will fix that real quick. If I can find the button I want. I cannot find the button I want. I need to use my brain. Oh, it's one of those you type in chat, isn't it? VIP. Yeah, it is. Ding. As you say, that's where we were. As you say, Conseil, I fancy we shall run a fair chance of being laughed at for our pains. That's tolerably certain. I think they'll make fun of you, sir, and must I say it? Oh, go on, good friend. Well, sir, you'll only get your deserts. Indeed. When one has the honor of being a savant as you are, sir, one should not expose oneself to... Conseil had not time to finish his compliment. In the midst of the general silence, a voice had just been heard. It was the voice of Ned Land shouting. Look out there! The very thing we are looking for! On our weather beam! How far are we? Okay. Chapter 6, At Full Steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried towards the harpooner. Commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys, even the engineers left their engines and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he'd managed to see and what he'd been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' length from the Abraham Lincoln on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was no mere phosphoric phenomenon. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water, and then threw out that very intense but mysterious light mentioned in the report of several captains. I don't think he's got Canadian's eyes would be a music hit. You never know. With the right beat, that might sell these days. Magnificent phosphorescence. This magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea was of an immense oval, much elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat, whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive gradations. "It's only a massing of phosphoric particles!" cried one of the officers. Massing of phosphoric particles is now the band who sings He's Got Canadian's Eyes. No, sir, certainly not, I replied. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It's moving forwards, backwards, it's darting towards us. A general cry arose from the frigate. Silence, said the captain. Up with the helm. Reverse the engines. That man developed an accent across that sentence. It's fine. The steam was shut off, and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. By the helm, go ahead. These orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made round to the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped it with its electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, heaving a phosphorescent track, like the volumes of steam that those express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly toward the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out, not diving under the water, for its brilliancy didn't abate, but suddenly, as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and didn't attack. Hello, Seattle! We are massing of phosphoric particles. This is our new song from our album of the same name. It's called He's Got Canadian's Eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom. It's just black MIDI noise wall. And they're just reading chunks of this book. Oh, man. I actually could probably write that. That'd be fun. We'll see if I have extra time. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. Mr. Aronnax, I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing? How defend oneself from it? Wait for daylight, and the scene will change. They have a special party when they sell 20,000 records. Absolutely, they do. Gariki with the good chat interaction this evening. Very good. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal? No, sir. It's evidently a gigantic narwhal and an electric one. Perhaps one can only approach it with a torpedo? Undoubtedly. If it possesses such dreadful power, it's the most terrible animal that was ever created. That's why, sir, I must be on my guard. The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rocket at will and seemed decided to not leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or, to use a more appropriate term, it died out like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope it. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. Song number 2 is called "Approach It with a Torpedo," so tune in and the waves rocket at will. Approach It with a Torpedo instead it is like a completely different genre from the first song. It's like a slow, like 80s synth-laden love ballad. And that's why they don't sell any records. They just can't pick a genre. Yeah, Magnus, you're right. I should pay attention to the book. There's even an upcoming EDM song. Body of water rushing with great violence. That's where I was. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop deck, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. Ned Land, have you often heard the roaring of whales? Often, sir, but never such the whales the sight of which often brought me in $2,000. If I can only approach within 4 harpoons' length of it. But to approach it, I ought to put a whaler at your disposal. Certainly, sir. That'll be trifling with the lives of my men. And mine too, simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to the windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of the wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail and even its panting breath. It seemed that at the moment that the enormous narwhal had come to take breath at the surface of the water, the air was engulfed in its lungs, like the steam in the vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. Thought I, a whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a very pretty whale. We were on the qui vive till daylight, prepared for combat the whole time. The fishing implements were laid upon the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to the distance of a mile, and long duck guns with explosive bullets which inflicted mortal wounds even in the most terrible animals. Ned Land, however, had contented himself with sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon in his hands. At 6 o'clock day began to break, and with the first glimmer of light the electric light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spyglasses could not pierce it. That caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzenmast. Some officers were already perched on the mastheads, and at 8 o'clock the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and clearer at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. "The thing itself on the port quarter!" cried the harpooner, and every eye was turned toward the point indicated. There, about a mile and a half from the frigate, a long blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. Never did a tail beat the sea with such violence. An immense track of dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal, and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean, and I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and the Helvetia was rather exaggerating its size, and I estimated its length at only about 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomenon, 2 jets of steam and water were ejected from its vents, and rose to the height of 120 feet. Thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded definitely that it belonged to the vertebrate branch, class Mammalia. The crew waited impatiently for their chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer, and the engineer ran to him. "Sir, have you got steam up?" "Yes, sir." "Well, make up your fires. Put on all steam." 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her wonderful screw, went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within about half a cable's length, and then, as if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. The pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at that rate we should never come up with it. "Well, Mr. Land, do you advise me to put the boats out to sea?" "No, sir, because we shall not take that beast easily." "What shall we do then?" "Put on more steam if you can, sir. With your leave, I begin to post myself under the bowsprit, and if we may get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon." "Go on, Ned. Engineer, put on more pressure." Ned Land went to his post, and the fires were increased. The screw revolved 43 times a minute, and the steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log, and calculated that the Abraham Lincoln was going at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam at the same speed. For a whole hour the frigate kept up this pace without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster, who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard. He was gnawing on it. The engineer was called again. "You've turned full steam on?" "Aye, sir." The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its masts trembled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find way out of the narrow funnels. They heaved the log a second time. "Well?" asked the captain of the man at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/10, sir." "Clap on more steam." The engineer obeyed, and the manometer showed 10 degrees. But the cetacean grew warm itself. "It's moving at 80 knots." But the cetacean grew warm itself, no doubt, for without straining itself, it made 19 and 3/10 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. "We shall catch it! We shall catch it!" cried the Canadian. Or rather, "We shall catch it! We shall catch it!" But just as he was going to strike, the cetacean stole away with a rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles an hour, and even during our maximum of speed it bullied the frigate, going round and round it. A cry of fury broke from everyone. At noon we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take a more direct means. That animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well. We'll see whether it can escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir." The forecastle gun was immediate. In Soviet water, whale trawls you. It really is trolling him. It's running circles around him while the boat's, like, shaking itself to pieces. This is a fantastic image. Forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round, but the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was a half-mile off. Another more to the right, and $5 to whoever'll hit that infernal beast. An old gunner with a gray beard that I can see now, with steady eye and grave face, went up to the gun and took a long aim. A loud report was heard, which mingled the cheers of the crew. The bullet indeed did its work. It hit the animal, and sliding off the rounded surface, was lost in 2 miles depth of sea. Cue the Scooby-Doo music. Indeed, this is a chase scene. Chase scene for the ages. Chase began again, and the captain, leaning towards me, said, I'll pursue that beast until my frigate bursts up." $5! Jumps off and goes hand to hand with the whale. $5 in the 1800s is a lot of money. We're in 1860s? We're in 1860s America. That's a lot of money. Anyway, I'll pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up. Yes, and you'll be quite right to do it. I wish the beast would exhaust itself and not be insensible to fatigue like a steam engine, but it was of no use. Hours passed without its showing any signs of exhaustion. However, it must be said in the praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably. I cannot reckon the distance she made under 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th, but night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. $5 in 1860 is worth $167.95 today. That's a good amount of money for hitting one pot shot. Night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and we should never again see the extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared, 3 miles to the windward of the frigate, as pure as intense as during the preceding night. The narwhal seemed motionless, perhaps tired with its day's work. It slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance of which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam and advanced cautiously, so as to not awake its adversary. It's no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they can be successfully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place again under the bowsprit. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' length from the animal, and following its track. No one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from the burning focus, the light of which increased and dazzled our eyes. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in his hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other, scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal. Suddenly his arm straightened, and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stern to stern, overthrowing men and breaking the lashings of the spars. A fearful shock followed, and thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. What do you think, library? This all sounds very, very exciting. My God, you killed Kenny! How about we show our face to the lovely people instead of our butts? Huh, kitty cat? He's like, well, I don't know. What I do know is you need to keep petting me. Yeah, don't nobody love poor library cat. Cat butt. It's true, cat butt. If I ever unlock emotes, I have a little Magnus emote. Magnus, my other cat, is a black cat, and he's just a little void lad. He loves he bread. Let's see here. We had time for No, we're not at time for an intermission. We have another half hour. Okay. Chapter 567, An Unknown Species of Whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I'm a pretty good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were masters of the art, and in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water, and my first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east, its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. "Help! Help!" I shouted, swimming towards the Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. "Help!" This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water. I struggled against being drawn down to the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn up to the surface of the sea. I heard these words pronounced in my ear. If master would be so good to lean on my shoulder, master would swim with much greater ease." I seized with one hand my faithful Conseil's arm. "Is it you? You?" "Myself, and wanting master's orders." "That shock threw you as well as me into the sea." "No, but being in my master's service, I followed him." The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. "And the frigate?" "The frigate?" replied Conseil, turning on his back. "I think that master had better not count too much on her." "You think so?" "I say that at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, 'The screw and rudder are broken.'" "Broken?" "Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained, but it is a bad lookout for us. She no longer answers her helm." "Well, then we're lost." "Perhaps so. However, we still have several hours before us, and one can do a good deal in some hours." Conseil's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like a leaden weight, I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Conseil saw this. "Will master let me make a slit?" said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off of me while I swam for the both of us. Then I did the same for Conseil, and we continued to swim near each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Conseil argued on this supposition and laid his plans accordingly. The quiet boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, that we ought to manage to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for some hours, perhaps until daybreak. Poor chance, but hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were 2 of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, that I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred about 11 o'clock in the evening before. I reckoned then we should have about 8 more hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Conseil was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found that he could not keep up much longer. "Leave me! Leave me!" "Leave my master? Never! I would drown first." Just then the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My head got better again. I looked at all points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass, barely discernible. But no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no such sounds, and Conseil could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help! Help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might only be a ringing in the ear, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Conseil. Did you hear?" "Yes, yes." And Conseil gave one more despairing cry. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature, abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of the shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Conseil made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder while I struck out in a desperate effort, he raised himself half out of the water, then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" I saw, but do not talk. Reserve all your strength." What had he seen? Then, I know not why, the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time. But that voice! The time has passed for Jonas to take refuge in whales' bellies. However, Conseil was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted, my fingers stiffened, my hand afforded me support no longer. My mouth, convulsively opening, filled with the salt water. Cold crept over me. I raised my head for the last time, and then I sank. At this moment a hard body struck me. I clung to it, and then I felt I was being drawn up, that I was brought to the surface of the water. My chest collapsed. I fainted. It's certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil? Does master call me?" Just then, by the waning light of the moon, which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face which was not Conseil's, which I immediately recognized. "Ned!" "The same, sir, who is seeking his prize," replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock to the frigate?" "Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you, I was able to find a footing almost directly on a floating island." An island?" "Or, more correctly speaking, on our gigantic narwhal." "Explain yourself, Ned." "Only soon I found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin and was blunted." "Why, Ned? Why?" "Because, Professor, the beast is made of sheet iron." The Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wriggled myself quickly to the top of the being or object half out of the water which served us for a refuge. I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of the great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony covering, like that of the antediluvian animals. I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles, such as tortoises or alligators. Well, no. The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scale. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, it must be owned that was a still more astonishing phenomenon, inasmuch as it was a simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of some sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on this point, and Conseil and I could only agree with it. Just then a bubbling began at the back of the strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. As long as it sails horizontally, I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life. The Canadian might still have said less. It became really necessary to communicate with the beings, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, a panel or a manhole to use a technical expression, but the lines of the iron rivets solidly driven in the joints of the iron plates were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then, and left us in total darkness. At last this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony produced by the words of command. What was, then, the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world would vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily, the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly a noise, like ironworks violently pushed aside, came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved, a man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, 8 strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into their formidable machine. Okay, no, library's too comfy. We'll go one more chapter before I take a intermission. Actually, no, I need some water. It's intermission time. It's that time of the night where we take about 15 minutes in real time to get up, stretch our legs, get some water, maybe have a snack if it's snack time for you. This is also your blanket reminder to take medications if you need them. I'll be back in at most 15 minutes. I really should have a BRB command. That would be really nice. But I will bring up the BRB. No, we're not starting soon anymore. We're being right back, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes. Do not adjust your sets here. It's gonna be quiet because I don't have the music prepared because I have large brain. I will probably try to set up the music before I go get some water, but I will be back in about 15 minutes where we will find out just what's in this weird submarine. Okay, we've had ourselves a little break. I forgot to start the timer, so I'm gonna call that 15 minutes. I don't know if it was actually 15 minutes. I usually start myself a timer. I did not think of that this evening. As you can tell, my brain is very, very much screwed on all the way tonight. You know. Let's flip back to the camera. Hope it doesn't break anything. Ever, come here. Come here. Come here, kitty. It was 9 to 10 minutes. Alright, I was pretty close. Come here, kitty. You don't need to be hassling them K-balls. Papa, they string. Oh, he's off to go cause problems. They have two little problems men who love their problems. Perhaps we'll see Magnus. He's not exactly fond of the camera. Are you? Come here, man. He's like, nope, I'm hungry. Alright, let's, chapter 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. Chapter 8. Let's find out what's in this submarine, shall we? Mobilis in mobile. This forcible abduction, so roughly carried out, was accomplished with the rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some sort of new pirates who explored the sea in their own way. Hardly had the narrow panel closed upon me when I was enveloped in darkness. My eyes, dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rungs of an iron ladder. Ned Land and Conseil, firmly seized, followed me. At the bottom of the ladder, a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone. Where, I could not say, hardly imagine. All was black, and such a dense black that after some minutes my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it! Here are people who come up to the Scotch for hospitality. They only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at it, but I declare that they shall not eat me without my protesting." "Oh, calm yourself, friend Ned, calm yourself. Do not cry out before you're hurt. We're not quite done for yet." "Not quite, but pretty near at all events. Things look black. Happily, my bowie knife I have still, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates who lands a hand on me." "Do not excite yourself, Ned, and do not compromise us by useless violence. Who knows what they will not listen to us? Let us rather try to find out where we are." I groped about. In 5 steps I came to an iron wall, made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table, near which were ranged several stools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of the window or door. Conseil, going round the reverse way, met me, and we went back to the middle of the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without consequence, without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted. That is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter, so strong I could not bear it at first. In its whiteness and intensity I recognized that electric light which played round the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomenon of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them and saw that this luminous agent came from a half-globe unpolished, placed in the roof of the cabin. "At last one can see," cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. "Yes, but we're still in the dark about ourselves." "Let master have patience," said the imperturbable Conseil. The sudden lighting of the cabin enabled me to examine it minutely. It only contained a table and 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead in the interior of this boat. Did it move, or did it float on the surface of the ocean? Did it dive into the depths? I could not guess. Gariki says, there's the EDM hit, Phenomenon of Phosphorescence. Alternately, Luminous Globe. Luminous Globe's definitely a track on this real album that we're definitely writing. A noise of bolts was now heard. The door opened and 2 men appeared. One was very short, very muscular, broad-shouldered, with robust limbs, strong head, an abundance of black hair, thick moustache, a quick penetrating look, and the vivacity which characterizes the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. I made out his prevailing qualities directly. Self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked around with cold assurance. Calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed the coolness of his blood. Energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows, and courage, because his deep breathing denoted great power of lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, had a large forehead, straight nose, and a clearly cut mouth. Beautiful teeth, with fine, tapered hands, indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of vision far superior to Ned Land's. When the stranger fixed upon an object his eyebrows met, his large eyelids closed around so as to contract the range of his vision, and he looked as if he had magnified the object lessened by a distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, and as if he read the very depths of the seas. The 2 strangers, with caps made from the fur of the sea otter and shod with sea boots of a seal's skin, were dressed in clothes of particular texture, which allowed free movement of the limbs. The taller of the 2, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention, without saying a word, and then turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was a sonorous, harmonious, and flexible dialect, the vowels seeming to admit of very varied accentuation. The other replied by a shake of the head, and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words, and he seemed to question me by a look. I replied in good French that I didn't know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. If master were well to tell our story, perhaps these gentlemen may understand some words. I began to tell our adventures, articulating each syllable clearly, and without omitting one single detail. I announced our names and ranks, introducing in person Professor Aronnax, his servant Conseil, and Master Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with the soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention, but nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I was finished, he said not a word. There remained one resource, to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I knew it, as well as the German language, well enough to read it fluently, but not to speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. Go on in your turn, I said to the harpooner. Speak your best Anglo-Saxon, and try to do better than I. Ned did not beg off, and recommenced our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of England nor of France. Very much embarrassed, after having vainly exhausted our speaking resources, I knew not what part to take when Conseil said, If master will permit me, I'll relate it in German. Well, he certainly will, but I won't be able to read anything with Magnus in the way here. Also, this is Magnus. Say hello, Magnus.
Nope, I'm too busy sniffing, too busy snorfing.
He wants pets?
He's like, no, I'm good.
Off he goes to lay on my ankles. Such a sweet little man. But in spite of the elegant terms and good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success either. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lessons and to narrate our adventures in Latin, but with no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the two strangers exchanged some words in their unknown language and retired, the door shutting behind them. "It is an infamous shame," cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. Boys, don't tussle on stream. Library has been offended by Magnus in some fashion. Magnus, come here. Yeah, hi, come here. He's like, nope, the camera's on. I don't want any of that. Okay. The 20th time. We speak to the rogues in French, English, German, and Latin, and not one of them has the politeness to answer. Oh, calm yourself. Anger will do no good. But do you see, Professor, that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage? Said Conseil philosophically. We can hold out some time yet. My friends, we really must not despair. We've been worse off with this. Do me the favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon the commander and crew of this boat. My opinion is formed. They are rascals. Good. And from what country? From the land of rogues. My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world, but I admit that the nationality of these two strangers is hard to determine. Neither English, French, nor German, that's quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in low latitudes. There's southern blood in them, but I cannot decide by their appearance whether they're Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, or Indians. As to their language, it's quite incomprehensible. There is the disadvantage of not knowing all languages, or the disadvantage of not having one universal language. As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered, who brought us clothes, coats, and trousers, made of a stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companions followed my example. During that time, the steward, dumb, perhaps deaf, had arranged the table, and laid 3 plates. Library, come here. Now is not the time for problems. Thank you. This is something like. Nah. What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise, liver, filleted shark, beefsteaks from sea dogs? We shall see. The dishes of bell metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and had it not been for the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was in the dining room of the Adelphi Hotel at Liverpool, or the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water, and did not suit Ned Land's taste. Amongst the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fish, delicately dressed, but of some, although excellent, I would give no opinion. Neither could I tell to what kingdom they belonged, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant and in perfect taste. Each utensil, fork, knife, spoon, plate, had a letter engraved upon it, with a motto above it, of which this is an exact facsimile: Mobilis in mobiline. The letter N was no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the seas. Ned and Conseil did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. It was, besides, reassured as to our fate, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. However, everything has an end. Everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetites satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. Faith, I shall sleep well. So shall I, replied Ned Land. My 2 companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet, and we were soon sound asleep. For my own part, too many thoughts crowded on my brain, too many insoluble questions pressed upon me, too many fancies kept my eyes half open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw in these mysterious asylums a world of unknown animals, amongst which the submarine boat seemed to be of the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. And then my brain grew calmer. My imagination wandered into a vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 9. Ned Land's Tempers. How long we slept, I do not know. But our sleep must have lasted long, for it rested us completely from our fatigues. I woke first. My companions had not moved and were still stretched in their corner. Sorry, I'm adjusting some settings behind the scenes there. Hardly roused from my somewhat hard couch, I felt my brain freed, my mind clear, and then I began an attentive examination of our cell. Nothing was changed inside. The prison was still a prison. Prisoners, prisoners. However, the steward, during our sleep, had cleared the table. I breathed with difficulty. The heavy air seemed to oppress my lungs. Although the cell was large, we had evidently consumed a great part of the oxygen it contained. Indeed, each man consumes, in 1 hour, the oxygen contained in more than 176 pints of air, and this air, charged as then with a nearly equal quantity of carbonic acid, becomes unbreathable. It became necessary to renew the atmosphere of our prison, and no doubt the whole of the submarine boat. That gave rise to a question in my mind. How would a commander of this floating dwelling place proceed? Would he obtain air by chemical means, in getting by heat the oxygen contained in a chlorid of potash, and in absorbing carbonic acid by caustic potash? Or a more convenient, economical, and consequently more probable alternative would be satisfied to rise and take breath at the surface of the water like a whale, and so renew for 24 hours the atmospheric provision. Magnus, buddy, my feet are attached to my legs. Why can't you remember this?
He's like, no, those aren't feet. Those are demons under the blanket. I must attack.
Yeah. Is that how you feel? Oh, you've successfully defeated the feet, and now you must clean. Sorry, you all can't see Magnus on this screen. He's a little further down the way. But he's there. He's causing problems. That's where we were. In fact, I was already obliged to increase my respirations to eke out of this cell the little oxygen it contained, when suddenly I was refreshed by a current of pure air, and it perfumed with saline emanations. It was an invigorating sea breeze charged with iodine. I opened my mouth wide, and my lungs saturated themselves with the fresh particles. At the same time, I felt the boat rolling. The iron-plated monster had evidently just risen to the surface of the ocean to breathe after the fashion of whales. I found out from that the mode of ventilating the boat. When I had inhaled this air freely, I sought the conduit pipe which conveyed the beneficial whiff, and I was not long in finding it. Above the door was a ventilator, through which volumes of fresh air renewed the impoverished atmosphere of the cell. I was making my observations when Ned and Conseil awoke at almost the same time, under the influence of this reviving air. They rubbed their eyes, stretched themselves, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did master sleep well?" "Very well, my brave boy. And you, Mr. Land?" "Soundly, Professor. But I don't know if I am right or not. There seems to be a sea breeze." A seaman could not be mistaken, and I told the Canadian all that had passed during his sleep. "Good. That accounts for the roarings we heard when the supposed narwhal sighted the Abraham Lincoln." "Quite so, Mr. Land. It was taking breath." "Only, Mr. Anonax, I have no idea what o'clock it is unless it is dinner time." "Dinner time, my good fellow. Say rather breakfast time, for certainly we've begun another day." "So we've slept 24 hours?" "That's my opinion." "I will not contradict you, but dinner or breakfast, the steward will be welcome whichever he brings. Oh, Master Land, we must conform to the rules on board, and I suppose our appetites are in advance of the dinner hour. That is just like you, friend Conseil. You are never out of temper, always calm. You'd return thanks before grace and die of hunger rather than complain. Time was getting on, and we were fearfully hungry, and by this time the steward did not appear. It was rather too long to leave us, if they really had good intentions toward us. Ned Land, tormented by the cravings of hunger, still got more angry, and notwithstanding his promise, I dreaded an explosion when he found himself with one of the crew. For 2 more hours Ned Land's temper increased. He cried, he shouted, but in vain. The walls were deaf. There was no sound to be heard in the boat. All was still as death. I did not move, for I should have felt the trembling motion of the hull under the influence of the screw. Plunged in the depths of the water, it belonged no longer to earth. This silence was dreadful. I felt terrified. Conseil was calm, and Ned Land was roaring. Just then a noise was heard outside. Steps sounded on the metal flags, the locks returned, the door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could rush forward to stop him, the Canadian had thrown him down and held him by the throat. The steward was choking under the grip of his powerful hand. Conseil was already trying to unclasp the harpooner's hand from his half-suffocated victim, and I was going to fly to the rescue, when suddenly I was nailed to the spot by hearing these words in French. "Be quiet, Mr. Land, and you, Professor, will you be so good as to listen to me?" Chapter 10. The Man on the Seas. It was the commander of the vessel who thus spoke. At these words, Ned Land rose suddenly. The steward, nearly strangled, tottered out on a sign from his master. But such was the power of the commander on board that not a gesture betrayed the resentment which this man must have felt toward the Canadian. Conseil, interested in spite of himself, I was stupefied, awaited in the silence the result of this scene. The commander, leaning against the corner of a table with his arms folded, scanned us with profound attention. Did he hesitate to speak? Did he regret the words which he had just spoken in French? One might almost think so. After some moments of silence, which not one of us dreamed of breaking, "Gentlemen," said he, in a calm and penetrating voice, "I speak French." Hang on, this guy needs a voice. "Gentlemen, I speak French, English, German, and Latin equally well. I could therefore have answered you at your first interview, but I wanted to know you first, and then to reflect. The story told by each one, entirely agreeing in the main points, convinced me of your identity. I know now that chance has brought before me Monsieur Pierre Aronnax, professor of national history at the Museum of Paris, entrusted with a scientific mission abroad, Conseil, his servant, and Ned Land, of Canadian origin, harpooner on board the frigate Abraham Lincoln of the Navy of the United States of America." I bowed my assent. It was not a question the commander put to me, therefore there was no answer to be made. This man expressed himself with perfect ease, without any accent. His sentences were well turned, his words clear, and his fluency of speech remarkable. Yet I did not recognize in him a fellow countryman. He continued the conversation in these terms. "You've doubtless thought, sir, that I have delayed long in paying you the second visit. The reason is that your identity recognized, I wish to weigh maturely what part to act towards you. I've hesitated much. Most annoying circumstances have brought you into the presence of a man who has broken all ties of humanity. You have come to trouble my existence." "Unintentionally." "Unintentionally?" replied the stranger, raising his voice a little. "Was it unintentionally that the Abraham Lincoln pursued me all over the seas? Was it unintentionally that you took passage in this frigate? Was it unintentionally that your cannonballs rebounded off the plating of my vessel? Was it unintentionally that Mr. Ned Land struck me with his harpoon." I detected a restrained irritation in these words, but to these recriminations I had a very natural answer to make, and I made it. "Sir, no doubt you are ignorant of the discussions which have taken place concerning you in America and Europe. You don't know that divers accidents caused by collisions with your submarine machine have excited public feeling in the two continents. I omit the theories without number by which it was sought to explain that of which you alone possess the secret. But you must understand, in pursuing you over the high seas of the Pacific, the Abraham Lincoln believed itself to be chasing some powerful sea monster, of which it was necessary to rid the ocean at any price." A half smile curled the lips of the commander, and then he continued in a calmer tone. "Monsieur Aronnax, dare you affirm that your frigate would not as soon have pursued and cannonaded a submarine boat as a monster?" "You're a real champ, Library. You just gonna let him clean you?" He's looked at me like, "Please stop him." "Nope. You two love each other, and it's time to let the secret be out. These two are peak sibling energy. They will sit here, and when one is asleep, the other will clean them. But as soon as they wake up, they'll stop." I'm shocked that Library's putting up with this, to be honest. But he's being a real champ. Yeah, you two make sure each other are clean. This question embarrassed me, for certainly Captain Farragut might not have hesitated. He might have thought it his duty to destroy a contrivance of this kind as he would a gigantic narwhal. "You understand, then, sir, that I have right to treat you as enemies?" I answered nothing, purposely. For what good would it be to discuss such a proposition when force could destroy the best arguments? "I have hesitated some time. Nothing obliged me to show you hospitality. If I chose to separate myself from you, I should have no interest in seeing you again. I could place you upon the deck of this vessel, which has served you as a refuge. I could sink beneath the waters and forget that you had ever existed. Would that not be my right?" You can just barely see that Magnus was cleaning Library. Sorry, I got distracted and looked over at the webcam. Anyway. Zoot says my phone. Make sure this isn't anything wildly important. Nope. "It might be the right of a savage," I answered, "but not that of a civilized man." "Professor, I'm not what you call a civilized man. I've done with society entirely, for reasons I alone have the right of appreciating. I do not, therefore, obey its laws, and I desire you never allude to them before me again." This was said plainly. A flash of anger and disdain kindled in the eyes of the unknown, and I had a glimpse of a terrible past in the life of this man. Not only had he put himself beyond the pale of human laws, but he had made himself independent of them, free in the strictest exception of the word. Free in the strictest exception of the word, quite beyond their reach. Who then would dare to pursue him at the bottom of the sea, when, on its surface, he defied all attempts made against him? What vessel could resist the shock of this submarine monitor? What cuirass, however thick, could withstand the blows of his spur? No man could demand from him an account of his actions. God, if he believed in one, his conscience, if he had one, were the sole judges to whom he was answerable. These reflections crossed my mind rapidly, whilst the stranger personage was silent, absorbed, and as if wrapped up in himself. I regarded him with fear, mingled with interest, as doubtless Oedipus regarded the Sphinx. After a long silence, the commander resumed the conversation. "I have hesitated, but I've thought that my interest might be reconciled with that pity to which every human being has a right. You will remain on board my vessel, since fate has cast you there. You will be free, and in exchange for this liberty I shall only impose one single condition. Your word of honor to submit to it will suffice." "Speak, sir. I suppose this condition is one which a man of honor may accept?" "Yes, sir. It is this. It is possible that certain events, unforeseen, may oblige me to consign you to your cabins for some hours or some days, as the case may be. As I desire never to use violence, I expect from you, more than all the others, a passive obedience. In thus acting, I take all the responsibility. I acquit you entirely, for I make it an impossibility for you to see what ought not to be seen. Do you accept this condition?" Then things took place on board which, to say the least, were singular, and which ought not to be seen by people who were not placed beyond the pale of social laws. Amongst the surprises which the future was preparing for me, this might not be the least. "We accept, only I will ask your permission, sir, to address one question to you, one only." "Speak, sir." "You said that we should be free on board." "Entirely." "I ask you, then, what do you mean by this liberty?" "Just the liberty to go, come, to see, to observe all that passes here, save under rare circumstances. The liberty, in short, which we enjoy ourselves, my companions and I." It was evident that we did not understand one another. "Pardon me, sir, but this liberty is only what every prisoner has of pacing his prison. It cannot suffice us." "It must suffice you, however." "What? We must renounce forever seeing our country, our friends, our relations again?" "Yes, sir, but to renounce that unendurable worldly yoke which men believe to be liberty is not perhaps so painful as you think." "Well, never will I give my word of honor not to try to escape." "I did not ask you for your word of honor, Mr. Land." "Sir," I replied, beginning to get angry in spite of myself, "you abuse your situation towards us. It's cruelty." "No, sir, it's clemency. You are my prisoners of war. I keep you, when I could, by a word, plunge you into the depths of the ocean. You attacked me. You came to surprise a secret which no man in the world must penetrate. The secret of my whole existence. And you think that I'm going to send you back to that world which must know me no more? Never. In retaining you, it is not you whom I guard. It is myself." These words indicated a resolution taken on the part of the commander, against which no arguments would prevail. "So, sir, you give us simply the choice between life and death?" "Simply." "My friends, to a question thus put, there's nothing to answer, but no word of honor binds us to the master of this vessel." "None, sir." Then, in a gentler tone, he continued, "Now permit me to finish what I have to say to you. I know you, Monsieur Aronnax. You and your companions will not, perhaps, have so much to complain of in the chance which has bound you to my fate. You will find amongst the books which are my favorite study the work which you've published on the depths of the sea. I've often read it. You have carried out your work as far as terrestrial science permitted you. But you do not know all. You have not seen all. Let me tell you then, Professor, that you will not regret the time passed on board my vessel. You're going to visit the land of marvels." These words of the commander had a great effect upon me. I cannot deny it. My weak point was touched, and I forgot, for a moment, that the contemplation of these sublime subjects was not worth the loss of liberty. Besides, I trusted the future to decide this grave question, so I contented myself with saying, "By what name ought I address you?" "Sir," replied the commander, "I am nothing to you but Captain Nemo, and you and your passengers are nothing to me but the passengers of the Nautilus." Captain Nemo called, and a steward appeared. The captain gave him his orders in that strange language which I did not understand, and then turning toward the Canadian and Conseil, "A repast awaits you in your cabin," said he. "Be so good as to follow this man. And now, Monsieur Aronnax, our breakfast is ready. Permit me to lead the way."
I'm at your service, Captain.
I followed Captain Nemo, and as soon as I had passed through the door, I found myself in a passage lighted by electricity, similar to the waist of a ship. After we had proceeded a dozen yards, a second door opened before me. I then entered a dining room, decorated and furnished in severe taste. High oaken sideboards, inlaid with ebony, stood at two extremities of the room, and upon their shelves glittered china, porcelain, and glass of inestimable value. The plate on the table sparkled in the rays which the luminous ceiling shed around, while the light was tempered and softened by exquisite paintings. In the center of the room was a table richly laid out. Captain Nemo indicated the place I was to occupy. The breakfast consisted of a certain number of dishes, the contents of which were furnished by the sea alone, and I was ignorant of the nature and mode of preparation of some of them. I acknowledged that they were good, but they had a peculiar flavor which I easily became accustomed to. These different aliments appeared to me to be rich in phosphorus, and I thought they must have a marine origin. Captain Nemo looked at me. I asked him no questions, but he guessed my thoughts and answered of his own accord the questions which I was burning to address to him. "The greater part of those dishes are unknown to you. However, you may partake of them without fear. They are wholesome and nourishing. For a long time I have renounced the food of the earth, and I am never ill now. My crew, who are healthy, are fed on the same food."
So, all these eatables are produce of the sea?
"Yes, Professor. The sea provides all my wants. Sometimes I cast my nets in tow and draw them in ready to break. Sometimes I hunt in the midst of this element, which appears to be inaccessible to man, and quarry the game which dwells in my submarine forests. My flocks, like those of Neptune's old shepherds, graze fearlessly in the immense prairies of the ocean. I have a vast property there which I cultivate myself, and which is always sown by the hand of the Creator of all things."
I can understand perfectly, sir, that your nets furnish excellent fish for your table. I can understand that you hunt aquatic game in your submarine forest, but I cannot understand at all how a particle of meat, no matter how small, can figure in your bill of face. Or in your bill of fare, rather.
"And this which you believe to be meat, Professor, is nothing else than the fillet of the turtle. Here are also some dolphin's livers, which you take to be ragout of pork. My cook is a clever fellow, who excels in dressing these various products of the ocean. Take all these dishes. Here is a preserve of sea cucumber, which a Malay would declare to be unrivaled in the world. Here's a cream, of which the milk has been furnished by the cetacea, and the sugar by the great fucus of the North Sea. And lastly, permit me to offer you some preserve of anemones. Offer you some preserve of anemones, which is equal to that of most delicious fruits." I tasted, more from curiosity than as a connoisseur, whilst Captain Nemo enchanted me with his extraordinary stories. "You like the sea? Now, you like the sea, Captain?" "Yes, I love it. The sea is everything. It covers 7/10 of the terrestrial globe. Its breath is pure and healthy. It's an immense desert where man is never lonely, for he feels life stirring on all sides. The sea is the only embodiment of a supernatural and wonderful existence. It is nothing but love and emotion. It's the living infinite, as one of your peers has said. In fact, Professor, nature manifests herself in it, by her three kingdoms, mineral, vegetable, and animal. The sea is the vast reservoir of nature. The globe began with the sea, so to speak. And who knows if it will not end with it? In its supreme tranquility, the sea does not belong to despots. Upon its surface, men can still exercise unjust laws, fight, tear one another to pieces, and be carried away with terrestrial horrors. But at 30 feet below its level, their reign ceases, their influence is quenched, and their power disappears.
Sir, live in the bosom of the waters. There's only independence. There I recognize no masters. There I'm free. Captain Nemo became suddenly silent in the midst of his enthusiasm, by which he was carried away. For a few moments he paced up and down, much agitated. Then he became more calm, regained his accustomed coldness of expression, and turning towards me, spoke. What chapter are we on now? We are on chapter 10, I believe. Hang on. Yeah, we're a good ways into chapter 10. Yep, I remembered correctly. Now, if I can remember where I was. He spoke some things. Here we are. Now, Professor, if you wish to go over the Nautilus, I am at your service. Captain Nemo rose. I followed him. A double door contrived at the back of the dining room opened, and I entered a room equal in dimensions to which that I had just quitted. Yeah, these are much shorter chapters than the last man had. There's still 3 parts of this, I think. I assume this was published serially. It was kind of the style at the time. I'll have to check after stream. Anyway, the room I entered was a library. High pieces of furniture of black-violet ebony inlaid with brass supported upon their wide shelves a great number of books uniformly bound. They followed the shape of the room, terminating at the lower part in huge divans, covered with brown leather, which were curved to afford the greatest comfort. Light, movable desks made to be able to slide in and out at will allowed one to rest one's book while reading. In the center stood an immense table covered with pamphlets, amongst which were some newspapers already of old date. The electric light flooded everything. It was shed from 4 unpolished globes, half sunk in the volutes of the ceiling. I looked with real admiration at this room, so ingeniously fitted up, and I could scarcely believe my eyes. Captain Nemo, I said to my host, who had just thrown himself on one of the divans, this is a library which would do honor to more than one of the continental palaces. I'm absolutely astounded when I consider it can follow you to the bottom of the sea. Where can one find greater solitude or silence, Professor? Did your study in the museum afford you such perfect quiet? No, sir. I must confess it's a very poor one after yours. You must have 6,000 or 7,000 volumes here. 12,000, Monsieur Arnaud. These are the only ties which bind me to the earth. But I had done with the world on the day when my Nautilus plunged for the first time beneath the waters. That day I bought my last volumes, my last pamphlets, my last papers, and from that time I wish to think that men no longer think or write. These books, Professor, are at your service besides, and you can make use of them freely. I thanked Captain Nemo and went up to the shelves of the library. Works on science, morals, literature abounded in every language, but I did not see one single work on political economy. That subject appeared to be strictly prescribed. Strange to say, all these books were irregularly arranged, in whatever language they were written, and this medley proved that the captain of the Nautilus must have read indiscriminately the books which he took up by chance. Sir, I thank you for having placed this library at my disposal. It contains treasures of science, and I shall profit by them. This room is not only a library, it's also a smoking room. A smoking room? One can smoke on board? Certainly. Then, sir, I'm forced to believe that you've kept up a communication with Havana. Not any. Except the cigar, Monsieur Arnax, and though it does not come from Havana, you'll be pleased with it, if you are a connoisseur. I took the cigar which was offered me. Its shape recalled the London ones, but it seemed to be made of leaves of gold. I lighted it at a little brazier which was supported upon an elegant bronze stem, and drew the first whiffs with the delight of a lover of smoking who has not smoked for a few days. It's excellent, but this isn't tobacco. No, this tobacco comes neither from Havana nor from the East. It's a kind of seaweed, rich in nicotine, which the sea provides me, but somewhat sparing. At that moment, Captain Nemo opened a door which stood opposite to that by which I had entered the library, and I passed into an immense drawing room splendidly lighted. It was a vast, four-sided room, 30 feet long, 18 wide, and 15 high. A luminous ceiling, decorated with light arabesques, shed a soft, clear light all over the marvels accumulated in this museum. For it was, in fact, a museum, on which an intelligent and prodigal hand had gathered all the treasures of nature and art with the artistic confusion which distinguishes a painter's studio. 30 first-rate pictures, uniformly framed, separated by bright drapery, ornamented the walls, which were hung with tapestry of severe design. I saw works of great value, the greater part of which I admired in the special collections of Europe and the exhibitions of paintings. The several schools of the old masters were represented by a Madonna of Raphael, a Virgin of Leonardo da Vinci, a nymph of Correggio, a woman of Titan, an adoration of Veronese, an Assumption of Murillo, a portrait of Holbein, a monk of Velasquez, a martyr of Ribera, a fair of Rubens, 2 Flemish landscapes of Teniers, 3 little genre pictures of Gerard Dow, Metsu and Paul Potter, 2 specimens of Géricault and Proudhon, and some sea pieces of Bacusin and Vernet. Amongst the works of modern painters were pictures with signatures of Delacroix, Ingres, Decamps, Troyon, Meissonier, Daubigny, etc., and some admirable statues in marble and bronze after the finest antique models stood upon pedestals in the corners of this magnificent museum. Amazement, as the captain of the Nautilus had predicted, had already begun to take its possession of me. "Professor, you must excuse the unceremonious way in which I receive you and the disorder of this room." "Sir, without seeking to know who you are, I recognize you as an artist." "I'm an amateur, nothing more, sir. Formerly I loved to collect these beautiful works, created by the hand of man. I sought them greedily, and ferreted them out indefatigably, and I have been able to bring together some objects of great value. These are my last souvenirs of that world which is dead to me. In my eyes, your modern artists are already old. They have 2,000 or 3,000 years of existence. I confound them in my own mind. Masters have no age." "And these musicians?" said I, pointing out some works of Weber, Rossini, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Meyerbeer, Harold, Wagner, Auber, Gounod, and a number of others scattered over a large model piano organ which occupied one of the panels of the drawing room. I was fully expecting that list to include Monteverdi, and it didn't, and I was like, But Monteverdi is Italian, not French, so, And, not everyone can have as good a taste as me. Sorry, I'm shoving my foot in my mouth on this one. Where was I? These musicians are the contemporaries of Orpheus, for in the memory of the dead, all chronological differences are effaced, and I'm dead. Professor, as much dead as those of your friends who are sleeping 6 feet under the earth." Captain Nemo was silent and seemed lost in a profound reverie. I contemplated him with deep interest, analyzing in silence the strange expression of his countenance. Leaning on his elbow against an angle of a costly mosaic table, he no longer saw me. He'd forgotten my presence. I did not disturb this reverie, and continued my observation of the curiosities which enriched this drawing room. Under elegant glass cases, fixed by copper rivets, were classed and labeled the most precious productions of the sea which had ever been presented to the eye of a naturalist. My delight as a professor may be conceived. The division containing the zoophytes presented the most curious specimens of the 2 groups of polypi and echinoderms. Yeah. In the first group, the turbopores were gorgons arranged like a fan, soft sponges of Syria, isis of the Moluccas, penatules, and admirable pergolaria of the Norwegian seas, variegated
Unbeluriae, Acleonerae, a whole series of madipores which my master Milne Edwards has so cleverly classified, amongst which I remarked some wonderful Flabanlae Oculineae of the island of Bourbon, the Neptune's car, the Antilles, superb varieties of corals, in short, every species of the curious polypi of which entire islands are formed, which will one day become continents. Of the echidnoderms, remarkable for their coating of spines, asteri, sea stars, pantocrinae, chromatules, asterophons, echini, holothuri, etc., represented individually a complete collection of this group. A somewhat nervous conchiliologist. I recognize the base word there, but I can't remember how to pronounce it, so it's conchiliologist for now. A somewhat nervous conchiliologist would have certainly fainted before other more numerous cases in which there was classified the specimens of mollusks. Conch? Oh, like a conch shell. Like a conchologist. Sure. Yes. Studier of shells. You know. It was a collection of inestimable value, which time fails me to describe minutely. Amongst these specimens, I'll quote from memory only the elegant royal hammerfish of the Indian Ocean, whose regular white spots stood out brightly on a red and brown ground. An imperial spondyle, bright-colored, bristling with spines, a rare specimen in the European museums. I estimated its value at not less than 1,000 lira. I assume those are lira, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what that L is, right? I mean, 1,000 lira. I mean, they mention European museums. I assume it's Italian. Anyway, a common hammerfish of the seas of New Holland, which is only procured with difficulty. Exotic Bucari of Senegal, fragile white bivalve shells, which a breath might shatter like a soap bubble. Several varieties of the Spergillium of Java, a kind of calcareous tube, edged with leafy folds. It's spelled wrong, too. Oh, it is spelled wrong. No wonder I have no idea how to say it. It's spelled wrong. That's what I get for reading this. This book is technically translated from French. Conchologist. See? If they had spelled it correctly, I wouldn't have blinked an eye. Conchologist. As in a conch shell. Oh, I've lost my place. Calcareous tube, edged with leafy folds, and much debated by amateurs. A whole series of trochei, some a greenish yellow, found in the American seas, other a reddish brown, natives of Australian waters, others from the Gulf of Mexico, remarkable for their imbricated shell, stellari found in the Southern Sea, and last, the rarest of all, the magnificent spur of New Zealand, and every description of delicate and fragile shells to which science has given appropriate names. Apart, in separate compartments, were spread out chaplets of pearls of the greatest beauty, which reflected the electric light in little sparks of fire. Pink pearls torn from the pinna marina of the Red Sea, green pearls of the halidite iris, yellow, blue, and black pearls, the curious productions of the divers mollusks of every ocean, and certain mussels of the watercourses of the north. Lastly, several specimens of an inestimable value, which had been gathered from the rarest pinnatides. Some of these pearls were larger than a pigeon's egg, and were worth as much, and sold more than that the traveller Tavernier sold to the Shah of Persia for 3 millions, and surpassed the one in the possession of the Imam of Muscat, which I believe to be unrivaled in the world. Imagine that for a moment. A pearl larger than a pigeon egg. Like, a pigeon egg's probably about the size of a quail egg. It's probably not very big. That's still a absolutely massive pearl. Sorry, I needed to step aside and acknowledge that. That's big. Therefore, to estimate the value of this collection was simply impossible. Captain Nemo must have expended millions in the acquirement of these various specimens, and I was thinking what source he could have drawn from to be
have been able to thus gratify his fancy for collecting when I was interrupted by these words.
You're examining my shells, Professor? Unquestionably, they must be interesting to a naturalist, but for me they have a far greater charm, for I've collected them all with my own hand, and there's not a sea on the face of the globe which has escaped my researches.
I can understand, Captain, the delight of wandering about in the midst of such riches. You're one of those who have collected their treasures themselves. No museum in Europe possesses such a collection of the produce of the ocean. But if I exhaust all my admiration upon it, I shall have none left for the vessel which carries it. I do not wish to pry into your secrets, but I must confess that this Nautilus, with the motive power which is confined in it, the contrivances which enable it to be worked, the powerful agent which propels it, they all excite my curiosity to the highest pitch. I see suspended on the walls of this room instruments of whose use I'm ignorant.
You'll find these same instruments in my own room, Professor,
where I shall have much pleasure in explaining their use to you. But first come and inspect the cabin which is set apart for your own use. You must see how you'll be accommodated on board the Nautilus. I followed Captain Nemo, who, by one of the doors opening from each of the panel of the drawing room, regained the waist. He conducted me toward the bow, and there I found not a cabin, but an elegant room, with a bed, dressing table, several other pieces of excellent furniture. I could only thank my host.
Your room adjoins mine, and mine opens into the drawing room that we've just quitted.
I entered the captain's room. It had a severe, almost monkish aspect. A small iron bedstead, a table, some articles for the toilet, the whole lighted by a skylight. No comfort, the strictest necessaries only. Captain Nemo pointed to a seat.
Be so good as to sit down, he said,
and I did seat myself, and he began thus. Chapter 11. All by Electricity.
Sir,
said Captain Nemo, showing me the instruments hanging on the walls of his room,
here are the contrivances required for the navigation of the Nautilus. Here, as in the drawing room, I have them always under my eyes, and they indicate my position and exact direction in the middle of the ocean. Some are known to you, such as the thermometer, which gives the internal temperature of the Nautilus, the barometer, which indicates the weight of air and foretells the changes of weather, the hygrometer, which marks the dryness of the atmosphere, the storm glass, the contents of which, by decomposing, announce the approach of tempests, the compass, which guides my course, the sextant, which shows the latitude by the altitude of the sun, chronometers, by which I calculate the longitude, and glasses for day and night, which I use to examine the points of the horizon when the Nautilus rises to the surface of the waves. These are the usual nautical instruments, and I know the use of them, but these others, no doubt, answer to the particular requirements of the Nautilus. This dial with a movable needle, it's a manometer, is it not? It is actually a manometer, but by communication with the water, whose external pressure it indicates, it gives our depth at the same time.
And these other instruments, the use of which I cannot guess?
Here, Professor, I ought to give you some explanations. Will you be kind enough to listen to me?
He was silent for a few moments, and then continued.
There is a powerful agent, obedient, rapid, easy, which conforms to every use and reigns supreme on board my vessel. Everything is done by means of it. It lights, warms it, and is the soul of my mechanical apparatus. The agent is electricity.
Electricity?
Yes, sir.
Nevertheless, Captain, you possess an extreme rapidity of movement which does not agree well with the power of electricity. Until now, its dynamic force has remained under restraint and has only been able to produce a small amount of power.
Professor, my electricity is not everywhere. You may know what seawater is composed of. In 1,000 grams are found 96.5% of water and about 2 2/3% of chloride of sodium. Then in a smaller quantity chlorides of magnesium, potassium, bromide of magnesium, sulfate of magnesia, sulfate and carbonate of lime. You see then that the chloride of sodium forms a large part of it.
So it is this sodium which I extract from the seawater, and of which I compose my ingredients. I owe all to the ocean. It produces electricity, and electricity gives height, it gives heat, light, motion, and in a word, life to the Nautilus.
Not the air you breathe?
Oh, I could manufacture the air necessary for my consumption, but it's useless, because I go up to the surface of the water when I please. However, if electricity does not furnish me with air to breathe, it works at least the powerful pumps that are stored in spacious reservoirs, and which enable me to prolong at need, and as long as I will, my stay in the depths of the sea. It gives a uniform and unintermittent light, which the sun does not. Now look at this clock. It's electrical, goes with a regularity that defies the best chronometers. I've divided it into 24 hours, like the Italian clocks, because for me there is neither night nor day, sun nor moon, but only that facetious light that I take with me to the bottom of the sea. Look, just now, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Exactly. Another application of electricity. This dial hanging in front of us indicates the speed of the Nautilus. An electric thread puts it in communication with the screw, and the needle indicates the real speed. Look, we are spinning along with a uniform speed of 15 miles an hour.
That's marvelous.
I see, Captain, you were right to make use of this agent that takes the place of wind, water, and steam. We've not finished, Monsieur Arnax. If you will allow me, we will examine the stern of the Nautilus. Really, I already knew the anterior part of this submarine boat, of which this is the exact division, starting from the ship's head. The dining room, 5 yards long, separated from the library by a watertight partition. The library, 5 yards long. The large drawing room, 10 yards long, separated from the captain's room by a second watertight partition. The said room, 5 yards in length, mine, 2.5 yards, and lastly a reservoir of air, 7.5 yards, that extended to the bows. Total length 35 yards, or 105 feet. The partitions had doors that were shut hermetically by means of india-rubber instruments, and they ensured the safety of the Nautilus in case of a leak. I followed Captain Nemo through the waist and arrived at the center of the boat. There was a sort of well that opened between two partitions. An iron ladder, fastened with an iron hook to the partition, led to the upper end. I asked the captain what was the ladder used for. It leads to the small boat.
What? You have a small boat?
Of course, an excellent vessel, light and insubmersible, that serves as either a fishing or as a pleasure boat.
But then when you wish to embark, you're obliged to come to the surface of the water?
Not at all. This boat is attached to the upper part of the hull of the Nautilus, and occupies a cavity made for it. It is decked quite watertight and held together by solid bolts. This ladder leads to a manhole made in the hull of the Nautilus, that corresponds with a similar hole in the side of the boat. By this double opening I get into the small vessel. They shut the one belonging to the Nautilus. I shut the other by the means of screw pressure. I undo the bolts, and the little boat goes up to the surface of the sea with prodigious rapidity. I then open the panel of the bridge, carefully shut till then. I mast it, hoist my sail, take my oars, and I'm off.
How do you get back on board?
I do not come back, Monsieur Armax. The Nautilus comes to me.
By your orders?
By my orders. An electric thread connects us. I telegraph to it, and that is enough.
Really? Nothing can be more simple.
After having passed by the cage of the staircase that led to the platform, I saw a cabin 6 feet long, in which Conseil and Ned Land, enchanted with their repast, were devouring it with avidity. Then a door opened into a kitchen 9 feet long, situated between the large storerooms. There electricity, better than gas itself, did all the cooking. The streams under the furnaces gave out to the sponges of patina a heat which was regularly kept up and distributed. They also heated a distilling apparatus, which, by evaporation, furnished excellent drinkable water. Near this kitchen was a bathroom, comfortably furnished, with hot and cold water taps. Next to the kitchen was the berth room of the vessel, 16 feet long. But the door was shut, and I could not see the management of it. which might have given me an idea of the number of men employed on board the Nautilus. At the bottom was a fourth partition that separated this office from the engine room. A door opened, and I found myself in the compartment where Captain Nemo, certainly an engineer of a very high order, had arranged his locomotive machinery. This engine room, clearly lighted, did not measure less than 65 feet in length. It was divided into two parts. The first contained the materials for producing electricity, and the second the machinery that connected it with a screw. I examined it with great interest in order to understand the machinery of the Nautilus. You see, I use Bunsen's contrivances, not Rachmaninoff's, not Rachmaninoff's. These would not have been powerful enough. Bunsen's are fewer in number, but strong and large, which experience proves to be the best. The electricity produced passes forward where it works by electromagnets of great size, on a system of levers and cogwheels that transmit the movement to the axle of the screw. This one, the diameter of which is 19 feet and the thread 23 feet, performs about 120 revolutions in a second. And you get that? A speed of 50 miles an hour. I've seen the Nautilus maneuver before the Abraham Lincoln. I have my own ideas as to its speed, but this is not enough. We must see where we go. We must be able to direct it to the right, to the left, above, below. How do you get to the great depths where you find an increasing resistance, which is rated by hundreds of atmospheres? How do you return to the surface of the ocean? How do you maintain yourselves in the requisite medium? Am I asking too much? Not at all, Professor, replied the captain with some hesitation, since you may never leave this submarine boat. Come into the saloon. It's our usual study, and there you will learn all you want to know about the Nautilus. Oh, excuse me. Oh, I probably should have muted the mic for that one, actually. Oh, of course. As soon as I take a break, I get the hiccups. Oh, no. Okay, everybody in chat, count with me. We're gonna hold our breath as long as we can. $40 will have to do. Yeah, if they persist, I'll throw up another BRB and get some water. I just didn't want to disturb poor library cat. He's so comfy. Alright, chapter 12, some figures. After a moment after, we were seated on a divan in the saloon smoking. The captain showed me a sketch that gave the plan, section, and elevation of the Nautilus. Now that I have a BRB command, it's handy. Yeah! The plan, section, and elevation of the Nautilus. Then he began his description in these words. Here, Monsieur Aronnax, are the several dimensions of the boat you're in. It is an elongated cylinder with conical ends. It's very like a cigar in shape, a shape already adopted in London and several constructions of the same sort. The length of this cylinder, from stern to stern, is exactly 232 feet, and its maximum breadth is 26 feet. It is not built quite like your long voyage steamers, but its lines are sufficiently long, and its curve prolonged enough to allow the water to slide off easily and oppose no obstacle to its passage. These two dimensions enable you to obtain, by a simple calculation, the surface and cubic contents of the Nautilus. Its area measures 6,032 feet, and its contents about 1,500 cubic yards. That is to say, when completely immersed, it displaces about 50,000 feet of water, and weighs about 1,500 tons. When I made the plans for this submarine vessel, I meant that 9/10 should be submerged. Consequently, it ought only to displace 9/10 of its bulk. That is to say, not only to weigh the number of tons. I ought not, therefore, to have exceeded that weight, constructing it on the aforesaid dimensions. The Nautilus is composed of two hulls, one inside, the other outside, joined by T-shaped irons, which render it very strong. Indeed, owing to the cellular arrangement, it resists like a block as if it were solid. Its sides cannot yield, it coheres spontaneously, and not by the closeness of its rivets, and its perfect union of the materials enables it to defy the roughest seas. These two hulls are composed of steel plates whose density is from 0.7 to 0.8 of that of water. The first is not less than 2.5 inches thick and weighs 394 tons. The second envelope, the keel, 20 inches high and 10 thick, weighs only 62 tons. The engine, the ballast, the several accessories, and apparatus appendages, the partitions and bulkhead, weigh 961.62 tons. Do you follow all this?
I do.
Then, when the Nautilus is afloat under these circumstances, 1/10 is out of the water. Now, if I have made reservoirs of a size equal to this tenth, or capable of holding 150 tons, if I fill them with water, the boat, weighing then 1,507 tons, will be completely immersed. That would happen, Professor. These reservoirs are in the lower part of the Nautilus. I turn on taps and they fill, and the vessel sinks that had just been level with the surface.
Well, Captain, but now we come to the real difficulty. I can understand your rising to the surface, but diving below the surface, does not your submarine contrivance encounter a pressure and consequently undergo an upward thrust of 1 atmosphere for every 30 feet of water, just about 15 pounds per square inch?
Just so, sir.
Then, unless you quite fill the Nautilus, I do not see how you can draw it down to those depths.
Professor, you must not confound statics with dynamics, or you'll be exposed to grave errors. There's very little labor spent in attaining the lower regions of the ocean, for all bodies have a tendency to sink. When I wanted to find out the necessary increase of weight required to sink the Nautilus, I had only to calculate the reduction of volume that the seawater acquires according to the depth.
Oh, that's evident.
Now, if water is not absolutely incompressible, it is at least capable of very slight compression. Indeed, after the most recent calculations, this reduction is only 0.000436 of an atmosphere for each 30 feet of depth. If we want to sink 3,000 feet, I should keep account of the reduction of bulk under a pressure equal to that of a column of water of 1,000 feet. The calculation is easily verified. Now, I have supplementary reservoirs capable of holding 100 tons. Therefore, I can sink to a considerable depth. When I wish to rise to the level of the sea, I only let off the water and empty all the reservoirs if I want the Nautilus to emerge from the 10th part of her total capacity. I had nothing to object to these reasonings.
I admit your calculations, Captain. I should be wrong to dispute them, since daily experience confirms them, but I foresee a real difficulty in the way.
What, sir?
When you're about 1,000 feet deep, the walls of the Nautilus bear a pressure of 100 atmospheres. If
Then you were just now to empty the supplementary reservoirs to lighten the vessel. To go up to the surface, the pumps must overcome the pressure of 100 atmospheres, which is 1,500 pounds per square inch. From that, a power the electricity alone can give," said the captain hastily. "I repeat, sir, that the dynamic power of my engines is almost infinite. The pumps of the Nautilus have an enormous power, as you must have observed when their jets of water burst like a torrent upon the Abraham Lincoln. Besides, I use subsidiary reservoirs only to attain a mean depth of 750 to 1,000 fathoms, and that with a view of managing my machines. Also, when I have a mind to visit the depths of the ocean, 5 or 6 miles below the surface, I make use of a slower but not less infallible means." "What are they, Captain?" "That involves my telling you how the Nautilus is worked." "I'm impatient to learn." "To steer this boat to starboard or port, to turn, in a word, following a horizontal plan, I use an ordinary rudder, fixed on the back of the stern post, and with one wheel and some tackle to steer by. But I can also make the Nautilus rise and sink and rise, by vertical movement, by means of 2 inclined planes fastened to its sides, opposite the center of the flotation, planes that move in every direction, that are worked by powerful levers from the interior. If the planes are kept parallel with the boat, it moves horizontally. If slanted, the Nautilus, according to this inclination and under the influence of the screw, either sinks diagonally or rises diagonally as it suits me. And even if I wish to rise more quickly to the surface, I shift the screw, and the pressure of the water causes the Nautilus to rise vertically like a balloon filled with hydrogen." "Bravo, Captain, but how can the steersman follow the route in the middle of the waters?" "The steersman is placed in a glazed box that is raised about the hull of the Nautilus, and furnished with lenses." "Are these lenses perfectly capable of resisting pressure?" "Absolutely. Glass, which breaks at a blow, is nevertheless capable of offering considerable resistance. During some experiments of fishing by electric light in 1864 in the northern seas, we saw plates less than 1/3 of an inch thick resist the pressure of 16 atmospheres. Now the glass that I use is not less than 30 times thicker." "Granted, but after all, in order to see, the light must exceed the darkness, and in the midst of the darkness of the water, how can you see?" "Behind the steersman's cage is placed a powerful electric reflector, the rays from which light up the sea for half a mile in front." "Ah, bravo, Captain. Now I can account for the phosphorescence in the supposed narwhal that puzzled us so. I now ask you if the boarding of the Nautilus and of the Scotia that has been made such a noise had been the result of a chance rencontre?" "Quite accidental, sir. I was sailing only 1 fathom below the surface of the water when the shock came. It had no bad result." "None, sir, but now about your rencontre with the Abraham Lincoln." "Professor, I'm sorry for one of the best vessels in the American Navy, but they attacked me, and I was bound to defend myself. I contented myself, however, with putting the frigate hors de combat. She will not have any difficulty in getting repaired to the next port." "Ah, Commander, your Nautilus is certainly a marvelous boat." "Yes, Professor, and I love it as if it were part of myself. If danger threatens one of your vessels on the ocean, the first impression is a feeling of an abyss above and below. On the Nautilus, men's hearts never fail them. No defects to be afraid of, for the double shell is firm as iron. No rigging to attend to, no sails for the wind to carry away, no boilers to burst, no fire to fear, for the vessel is made of iron, not of wood, no coal to run short, for electricity is the only mechanical agent, no collision to fear, for it alone swims in deep water, no tempest to brave, for when it dives below the water it reaches absolute tranquillity. There, sir, that is the perfection of vessels. And if it is true that the engineer has more confidence in the vessel than the builder, and the builder than the captain himself, you understand the trust I repose in my Nautilus, for I am at once captain, builder, and engineer." "But how could you construct the wonderful Nautilus in secret?" "Each separate portion, Monsieur Aronnax, was brought from different parts of the globe." "But these parts had to be put together and arranged." Professor, I had set up my workshops upon a desert island in the ocean. There my workmen, that is to say, the brave men that I instructed and educated, and myself put together our Nautilus. Then, when the work was finished, fire destroyed all trace of our proceedings on this island that I could have jumped over if I had liked. And the cost of this vessel is great? Monsieur Aronnax, an iron vessel costs 145 lira per ton. Now the Nautilus weighed 1,500. It came therefore to 67,500 and 80,000 more for fitting it up, and about 200,000 with the works of art and the collections it contains. One last question, Captain Nemo. Ask it, Professor. You're rich. Immensely rich, sir, and I could, without missing it, pay the national debt of France. I stared at the singular person who spoke thus. Was he playing upon my credulity? The future would decide that. Chapter 13. The Black River. The portion of the terrestrial globe which is covered by water is estimated at upwards of 80 millions of acres. This fluid mass comprises 2,250,000,000 of cubic miles, forming a spherical body of diameter of 60 leagues, the weight of which could be compared to 3 quintillions of tons. To comprehend the meaning of these figures, it's necessary to observe that a quintillion is to a billion as a billion is to unity. In other words, there are as many billions in a quintillion as there are units in a billion. This mass of fluid is equal to about the quantity of water which would be discharged by all the rivers of the earth in about 40,000 years. During the geological epochs, the ocean originally prevailed everywhere. Then, by degrees, in the Silurian period, the tops of the mountains began to appear. The islands emerged, then disappeared in partial deluges, reappeared, became settled, formed continents, till at length the earth became geographically arranged, as we see in the present day. The solid had wrested from the liquid 37,657 square miles, equal to 12,960,000,000 of acres. The shape of continents allows us to divide the waters into 5 great portions: the Arctic or frozen ocean, the Antarctic or frozen ocean, the Indian, the Atlantic, and the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean extends from north to south between the 2 polar circles, and from east to west between Asia and America, over an extent of 145 degrees longitude. It is the quietest of seas. Its currents are broad and slow. It has medium tides and abundant rain. Such was the ocean that my fate destined me first to travel over under these strange conditions. Sir, we will, if you please, take our bearings and fix the starting point of this voyage. It's 11:45. I will go up again to the surface. The captain pressed an electric clock 3 times. The pumps began to drive the water from the tanks. The needle of the manometer marked by a different pressure the ascent of the Nautilus, and then it stopped. We have arrived. I went to the central staircase, which opened on the platform, clambered up the iron steps, and found myself on the upper port of the Nautilus. The platform was only 3 feet out of water. The front and back of the Nautilus was that of the spindle shape, which caused it justly to be compared to a cigar. I noticed that its iron plates, slightly overlaying each other, resembled the shell which clothes the bodies of our large terrestrial reptiles. It explained to me how natural it was, in spite of all glasses, that this boat should have been taken for a marine animal. Toward the middle of the platform, the longboat, half buried in the hull of the vessel, formed a slight excrescence. Fore and aft rose 2 cages of medium height and with inclined sides, partly closed by thick lenticular glasses, one destined for the steersman who directed the Nautilus, the other containing a brilliant lantern to give light on the road. The sea was beautiful, the sky pure. Scarcely could the long vehicle feel the broad undulations of the ocean. A light breeze from the east rippled the surface of the waters. The horizon, free from fog, made observation easy. Nothing was in sight. Not a quicksand, not an island, a vast desert. Captain Nemo, by the help of his sextant, took the altitude of the sun, which ought also to give the latitude. He waited for some moments till its disk touched the horizon. While taking observations, not a muscle moved. The instrument could not have been more motionless in a hand of marble. 12 o'clock, sir. When you like. I cast a look upon the sea, slightly yellowed by the Japanese coast, and descended to the saloon. And now, sir, I leave you to your studies. Our course is east-northeast. Our depth is 26 fathoms. Here are maps on a large scale by which you may follow it. The saloon is at your disposal, and with your permission I will retire. Captain Nemo bowed, and I remained alone, lost in thoughts all bearing on the commander of the Nautilus. For a whole hour I was deep in these reflections, seeking to pierce this mystery so interesting to me. Then my eyes fell upon the vast planisphere spread upon the table, and I placed my finger on the very spot where the given latitude and longitude crossed. The sea has its large rivers like the continents, their special currents known by their temperature and their color. The most remarkable of these is known by the name of the Gulf Stream. Science has decided on the globe the direction of 5 principal currents: one in the North Atlantic, a second in the South, a third in the North Pacific, a fourth in the South, and a fifth in the Southern Indian Ocean. It is even probable that a 6th current existed at one time or another in the Northern Indian Ocean, when the Caspian and Aral seas formed but one vast sheet of water. At this point indicated on the planisphere, one of these currents was rolling, the Kuroskivo of the Japanese, the Black River, which, leaving the Gulf of Bengal, where it is warmed by the perpendicular rays of the tropical sun, crosses the Straits of Malacca, along the coast of Asia, turns into the North Pacific, into the Aleutian Islands, carrying with it trunks of camphor trees and other indigenous productions, and edging the waves of the ocean with the pure indigo of its warm water. It was this current that the Nautilus was to follow. I followed it with my eye, saw it lose itself in the vastness of the Pacific, and felt myself drawn with it when Ned Land and Conseil appeared at the door of the saloon. My 2 brave companions remained petrified at the sight of the wonders spread before them. "Where are we? Where are we? In the museum at Quebec?" "My friends," I answered, making a sign for them to enter, "you're not in Canada, but on board the Nautilus, 50 yards below the level of the sea." "But, Monsieur Aronnax, can you tell me how many men there are on board? 10, 20, 50, 100? "I cannot answer you, Mr. Land. It is better to abandon for a time all idea of seizing the Nautilus or escaping from it. This ship is a masterpiece of modern industry. I should be sorry not to have seen it. Many people would accept the situation forced upon us, if only to move amongst such wonders. So be quiet, and let us try to see what passes around us." "See? But we can see nothing in this iron prison. We're walking, we're sailing blindly." Ned Land had secretly pronounced these words when all was suddenly darkness, or had scarcely pronounced these words when all was suddenly darkness. The luminous ceiling was gone, and so rapidly that my eyes received a painful impression. We remained mute, not stirring, and knowing not what surprise awaited us, whether agreeable or disagreeable. A sliding noise was heard. One would have said that the panels were working at the sides of the Nautilus. "It is the end of the end," said Ned Land. And suddenly light broke at each side of the saloon through 2 oblong openings. The liquid mass appeared vividly lit up by the electric gleam. 2 crystal plates separated us from the sea, and at first I trembled at the thought that this frail partition might break, but strong bands of copper bound them, giving an almost infinite power of resistance. The sea was distinctly visible for a mile all round the Nautilus. What a spectacle! What pen can describe it? Who could paint the effects of the light through the transparent sheets of water, and the softness of the successive gradations from the lower to the superior strata of the ocean? We know the transparency of the sea, and that its clearness is far beyond that of rock water. The mineral and organic substances which it holds in suspension heightens its transparency. In certain parts of the ocean to the Antilles, Under 75 fathoms of water can be seen with surprising clearness a bed of sand. The penetrating power of the solar rays did not seem to cease for a depth of 150 fathoms. But in this middle fluid traveled over by the Nautilus, the electric brightness was produced even on the bosom of the waves. It was no longer luminous water, but liquid light. On each side a window opened in this unexplored abyss. The obscurity of the saloon showed to advantage the brightness outside, and we looked out as if this pure crystal had been the glass of an immense aquarium. "Well, you wish to see, friend Ned. You see now." "Curious, muttered the Canadian, in a completely incorrect accent, who, forgetting his ill temper, seemed to submit to some irresistible attraction. "And one would come further than this to admire such a sight." I thought to myself, I understand the life of this man. He has made a world apart for himself, in which he treasures all his greatest wonders. For 2 whole hours, an aquatic army escorted the Nautilus. During their games, their bounds, while rivaling each other in beauty, brightness, and velocity, I distinguished the green lab, the banded mullet, marked by a double line of black, the round-tailed goby of a white color, with violet spots on the back, the Japanese scombris, a beautiful mackerel of these seas, with a blue body and silvery head, the brilliant azurors, whose name alone defies description, some banded spares, with variegated fins of blue and yellow, the woodcocks of the seas, some specimens of which attain a yard in length, Japanese salamanders, spider lampreys, serpents 6 feet long, with eyes small and lively, and a huge mouth bristling with teeth, with many other species. Our imagination was kept at its height. Interjections followed quickly on each other. Ned named the fish, and Conseil classed them. I was in ecstasies with the vivacity of their movements and the beauty of their forms. Never had it been given to me to surprise these animals, alive and at liberty in their natural element. I will not mention all the varieties which passed before my dazzled eyes, all the collection of the seas of China and Japan. These fish, more numerous than the birds of the air, come, attracted, no doubt, by the brilliant focus of the electric light. Suddenly there was daylight in the saloon, the iron panels closed again, and the enchanting vision disappeared. But for a long time I dreamt on, till my eyes fell on the instruments hanging on the partition. The compass still showed the course to be east-northeast. The manometer indicated a pressure of 5 atmospheres, equivalent to a depth of about 25 fathoms, and the electric log gave a speed of 15 miles an hour. I expected Captain Nemo, but he did not appear. The clock marked the hour of 5. Ned Land and Conseil returned to their cabin, and I retired to my chamber. My dinner was ready. It was composed of turtle soup, made of the most decadent hawk's bills, of a surmullet served with puff paste, the liver of which, prepared by itself, was most delicious, and fillets of the emperor holocanthus, the savour of which seemed to me superior even to salmon. I passed the evening reading, writing, and thinking, and then sleep overpowered me, and I stretched myself on my couch of zostera, and slept profoundly, while the Nautilus was gliding rapidly through the currents of the Black River. All right, Chapter 14, A Note of Invitation. The next day was the 9th of November. I awoke after a long sleep of 12 hours. Conseil came, according to custom, to know how I passed the night, and to offer his services. He had left his friend, the Canadian, sleeping like a man who had never done anything all his life. I let the worthy fellow chatter as he pleased without caring to answer him. I was preoccupied by the absence of the captain during our sitting of the day before, and hoping to see him today. As soon as I was dressed, I went into the saloon. It was deserted. I plunged into the study of the shell treasures, hidden behind the glasses. The whole day passed without my being honored by a visit from Captain Nemo. The panels of the saloon did not open. Perhaps they did not wish us to tire of these beautiful things. The course of the Nautilus was still east-northeast. Her speed 12 knots, the depth below the surface between 25 and 30 fathoms. The next day, 10th of November, the same desertion, the same solitude. I did not see one of the ship's crew. Ned and Conseil spent the greater part of the day with me. They were astonished at the puzzling absence of the captain. Was this singular man ill? Had he altered his intentions with regard to us? After all, as Conseil said, we enjoyed perfect liberty. We were delicately and abundantly fed. Our host kept to his terms of the treaty. We would not complain, and indeed, the singularity of our fate reserved such wonderful compensation for us that we had no right to accuse it as yet. That day I commenced the journal of these adventurers, which has enabled me to relate them with more scrupulous example and minute detail. 11th November, early in the morning, the fresh air spreading over the interior of the Nautilus told me that we'd come to the surface of the ocean to renew our supply of oxygen. I directed my steps to the central staircase and mounted the platform. It was 6 o'clock. The weather was cloudy, the sea gray but calm. Scarcely a billow. Captain Nemo, whom I had hoped to meet, would be there. I saw no one but the steersman imprisoned in his glass cage. Seated upon the projection formed by the hull of the pinnace, I inhaled the salt breeze with delight. By degrees the fog disappeared. On the action of the sun's rays, the radiant orb rose from behind the eastern horizon. The sea flamed under its glance like a train of gunpowder. The clouds scattered in the heights were colored with lively tints of beautiful shades, and numerous mare's tails, which betokened wind for that day. But what was wind to the Nautilus, which tempests could not frighten? I was admiring this joyous rising of the sun, so gay and so life-giving, when I heard steps approaching the platform. I was prepared to salute Captain Nemo, but it was his second-in-command, whom I had already seen on the captain's first visit, who appeared instead. He advanced on the platform, not seeming to see me. With his powerful glass to his eye, he scanned every point of the horizon with great attention. This examination over, he approached the panel and pronounced a sentence in exactly these terms. I have remembered it, for every morning it was repeated under exactly the same conditions. It was thus worded: Natron respect l'orni virch. What it meant, I could not say. These words pronounced, the second descended. I thought that the Nautilus was about to return to its submarine navigation, and I regained the panel and returned to my chamber. 5 days sped thus, without any change in our situation. Every morning I mounted the platform. The same phrase was pronounced by the same individual, but Captain Nemo did not appear. I had made up my mind that I should never see him again, when on the 16th of November, on returning to my room with Ned and Conseil, I found upon my table a note addressed to me. I opened it impatiently. It was written in a bold, clear hand, the characters rather pointed, recalling the German type. The note was worded as follows: To Professor Aronnax, on board the Nautilus, 16th of November, 1867. Captain Nemo invites Professor Aronnax to a hunting party, which will take place tomorrow morning in the forests of the island of Crespo. He hopes that nothing will prevent the professor from being present, and he will with pleasure see him joined by his companions. Captain Nemo, commander of the Nautilus. "A hunt!" exclaimed Ned. "And in the forests on the island of Crespo," added Conseil. "Oh, then the gentleman is going on terra firma." "That seems to me to be clearly indicated," said I, reading the letter once more. "Well, then, we must accept, but once more on dry ground we will know what to do. Indeed, I shall not be sorry to eat a piece of fresh venison." Without seeking to reconcile what was contradictory between Captain Nemo's manifest aversion to islands and continents, and his invitation to hunt in a forest, I contented myself with replying, "Let us see where the island of Crespo is." I consulted the planisphere, and in 32 degrees 40 minutes north latitude and 157 degrees 50 minutes west longitude, I found a small island, recognized in 1801 by Captain Crespo, and marked in the ancient Spanish maps as Roca de Plata, the meaning of which is the Silver Rock. We were then about 1,800 miles from our starting point, and the course of the Nautilus, a little changed, was bringing it back toward the southeast. I showed this little rock, lost in the midst of the North Pacific, to my companions. If Captain Nemo does sometimes go on dry ground, he at least chooses deserted islands. Ned Land shrugged his shoulders without speaking, and Conseil and he left me. After supper, which was served by the steward, mute and impassive, I went to bed, not without some anxiety. The next morning, the 17th of November, on awakening I felt that the Nautilus was perfectly still. I dressed quickly and entered the saloon. Captain Nemo was there waiting for me. He rose, bowed, and asked me if it was convenient for me to accompany him. As he made no allusion to his absence during the last 8 days, I didn't mention it, and simply answered that my companions and myself were ready to follow him. We entered the dining room, where breakfast was served.
Monsieur Aronnax, pray, share my breakfast without ceremony. We shall chat as we eat. For though I promised you a walk in the forest, I did not undertake to find hotels there. So breakfast as a man who will most likely not have his dinner till very late.
I did honor to the repast. It was composed of several kinds of fish, slices of sea cucumber, and different sorts of seaweed. One drink consisted of pure water, to which the captain added some drops of a fermented liquor, extracted by the Kamchatka method, from a seaweed known under the name of Rhodmenia palmata. Captain Nemo ate it first without saying a word, and then he began.
Sir, when I proposed to you to hunt in my submarine forest of Crespo, you evidently thought me mad. Sir, you should never judge lightly of any man.
Then, Captain, believe me.
Be kind enough to listen, and you'll then see whether you have any cause to accuse me of folly and contradiction.
All right, I listen.
You know as well as I do, Professor, that man can live under water, providing he carries with him a sufficient supply of breathable air. In submarine works, the workman, clad in impervious dress, with his head in a metal helmet, receives air from above by means of forcing pumps and regulators.
Yes, that's a diving apparatus.
Just so, but under these conditions the man is not at liberty. He is attached to the pump which sends him air through an india rubber tube, and if we were obliged to be thus held to the Nautilus, we could not go far.
And the means of getting free?
It is to use the Roquayrol apparatus, invented by 2 of your own countrymen, which I have brought to perfection for my own use, and which will allow you to risk yourself under these new physiological conditions, without any organ whatever suffering. It consists of a reservoir of thick iron plates, in which I store the air under a pressure of 50 atmospheres. This reservoir is fixed on the back by means of braces, like a soldier's knapsack. Its upper part forms a box in which the air is kept by means of bellows, and therefore cannot escape unless it is at its normal tension. In the Roquayrol apparatus, such as we use, 2 india-rubber pipes leave this box and join a sort of tent which holds the nose and mouth. One is to introduce fresh air, the other to let out the foul, and the tongue closes one or the other according to the wants of the respirator. But I, in encountering great pressures at the bottom of the sea, was obliged to shut my head like that of a diver in a ball of copper, and it is to this ball of copper that the 2 pipes, the inspirator and the expirator, open.
Perfectly, Captain Nemo, but the air that you carry with you should soon be used. When it only contains 15% of oxygen, it's no longer fit to breathe.
Right. But I told you, Monsieur Aronnax, that the pumps of the Nautilus allow me to store the air under considerable pressure, and on those conditions the reservoir of the apparatus can furnish breathable air for 9 or 10 hours.
Well, I have no further objections to make. I'll only ask you one thing, Captain. How do you light your road at the bottom of the sea?
With the Ruhmkorff apparatus, Monsieur Aronnax. One's carried on the back, the other's fastened to the waist. It's composed of a Bunsen pile, which I do not work with bichromate of potash, but with sodium. A wire is introduced which collects the electricity produced, and directs it towards a peculiarly made lantern. In this lantern is a spiral glass which contains a small quantity of carbonic gas. When the apparatus is at work, this gas becomes luminous, giving out a white and continuous light. Thus provided, I can breathe, and I can see.
To Captain Nemo, to all my objections, you're making such crushing answers that I dare no longer doubt, but if I'm forced to admit the roqueroll and the Rumcorp apparatus, I must be allowed some reservations with regard to the gun I'm to carry.
But it's not a gun for powder, answered the captain.
Then it's an air gun.
Doubtless. How would you have me manufacture gunpowder on board without either saltpeter, sulfur, or charcoal?
Besides, to fire underwater is in a medium 855 times denser than the air. We must conquer very and considerable resistance.
That would be no difficulty. There exist guns, according to Fulton, perfected in England by Philip Coles and Burley, in France by Fercy, and in Italy by Landi, which are furnished with a peculiar system of closing, which can fire under these conditions. And yet, I repeat, having no powder, I use air under great pressure, which the pumps of the Nautilus furnish abundantly.
But this air must be rapidly used.
Well, have I not my roqueroll reservoir, which can furnish it at need? A tap is all that is required. Besides, Monsieur Aronnax, you must see for yourself that during our submarine hunt we can spend but little air and but few ball.
But it seems to me that in this twilight, and in the midst of this fluid, which is very dense with the atmosphere, shots could not go far, not easily prove mortal.
Sir, on the contrary, with his gun every blow is mortal, and however lightly the animal is touched, it falls as if struck by a thunderbolt.
Why?
These balls are not ordinary balls that are sent by this gun. Little cases of glass, rather. These glass cases are covered with a case of steel and weighted with a pellet of lead. They are real Leyden bottles, into which the electricity is forced to a very high tension. With the slightest shock they're discharged, and the animal, however strong it may be, falls dead. I must tell you that these cases are size number 4, and the charge for an ordinary gun would be 10.
Nemo, does the air in the weaponry get counterbalanced to prevent rising in depth due to the increased buoyancy?
I mean, it might be a valid question, he asks. He's asking a lot of questions right now.
I will argue no longer, I replied, rising from the table. I have nothing left me but to take my gun. At all events, I will go where you go. Captain Nemo then led me aft, and in passing before Ned and Conseil's cabin, I called my 2 companions, who followed me promptly. We then came to a cell near the machinery room in which we put on our walking dress. All right, folks, I think that leaves us a good little leaving off point. We can pick back up next week with chapter 15. I really, really enjoy this. I really enjoy this book. It's fantastic. I'm really glad to be reading it again. This is a bit of a different translation than I recall reading as a child. I may wind up picking Arnell and Carrington are streaming. Arnell is reading. Carrington is a game. I might hop in and say hi to Arnell. Just because I don't think I've said hi to them yet. Thank you for pointing out who in the United Storytellers group is reading, is playing, is live. That's the word I'm looking for. Anyway, folks, we'll pick back up with chapter 15 next week. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.